Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 31, Ill Omen. We mounted up, prepared to head back towards the town. The other dungeon was in the opposite direction to this one and about 15 miles past the outskirts of the metro area. We weren't in much of a hurry, moving at a sedate pace. We were trying to see if we could find any monster tracks to follow so I could finish my level. "Come here, look at this," Fiona said, pointing to a massive paw print in a damp patch of dirt. "Looks fresh, I say we follow it." I looked at the paw print. It didn't look like the bears I fought on day 1. It didn't look like any track I could recall, which probably meant it was a beast that got brought over with the system. The paw prints were rather large, but it was only the one set. That's what eventually drove my decision. "Alright, let's see where it takes us. Lead on, Miss Tracker." We managed to follow the trail for 10 minutes, eventually losing sight of it as we crossed over a rocky area. I wasn't really surprised, neither one of us was all that good at tracking. "Well, what now? I guess," she started to say before our raver beasts' heads came up suddenly and swiveled towards the same direction. A point about 75 feet away dominated by thick vegetation. A menacing growl came from the bushes, followed by a large feline. This was not a simple cougar or mountain lion. Nope. This was something much larger, and much more dangerous. Possibly modified by the system, it was tough to tell from this distance. The cat stood 8 feet high and had to be almost 14 feet long without the tail. And let me tell you about the horrible, horrible tail. A scaled monstrosity even longer than the cat, tipped by vicious-looking spines. It resembled a bladed mace. Getting hit by that appendage would ruin your day real quick. Our raver beasts were chuffing angrily at the menacing beast, clawing the ground in an act of dominance. The beast roared back its challenge and charged, rushing Fiona before I even knew what was happening. Yonel, her mount, didn't bolt. It charged towards the creature, toothy jaw open wide and ready for battle. Fiona must have expected this, as she already had her sword out. Not to be outdone, Bella soon followed, cutting to the opposite side of the beast. When the powerful predator finally got close enough, I activated Identify. Chesic level 15. I had no idea what a Chesic was, but I could tell it was an alpha predator. It also had an intelligent gleam in its eyes that didn't bode well for us. The Chesic leaped at Fiona and her mount, trying to knock her off with a swipe of its massive paw. Yonel jumped over the attack, using its powerful hind legs to clear the predator, scoring a grazing slash across its back with its sharp talons. Fiona didn't escape the attack completely unscathed. The Chesic flicked its tail with surprising speed, trying to skewer her on the sharp protrusions. She managed to avoid most of the blow, only taking a large slash across her thigh. The beast turned to try and capitalize on its injured foe when Bella and I arrived. Bella tried to bite the beast's shoulder. The creature was incredibly nimble, twisting out of the way of Bella's attack. Before the beast could retaliate on me like it did on Fiona, I cast Earth Fist, trying to hit it in its soft belly. The beast used my spell to propel itself out of range, kicking off the rising spike of earth. "Hey, that's my move," I said angrily. I'll be honest, I was in awe of both the Chesic's ability and the raver beasts. I had almost forgotten that our mounts were trained for war. Fiona and I circled the Chesic as it eyed us warily, its ambush having failed to score it a meal. I took this time to heal Fiona's wound. Occasionally the Chesic would strike out with its tail, attempting to score a hit. Our mounts were agile enough to avoid the strikes while keeping the beast penned in. "Can you shackle it?" "I'll try, but they probably won't hold for long on such a large and high-leveled beast." "Okay, on 3, I said, counting. On 3 I did 2 things. I jumped from my mount, and as soon as I saw Fiona's spell take hold, I hit the Chesic with an earth fist that tore into its chest. It was only a glancing blow, the beast still managing to pivot to avoid most of the damage. It roared angrily, tearing at the ground to try to break free of Fiona's spell. As soon as my feet touched the ground, I activated Flurry, Aura Strike, and finally Blink Step. I blurred towards the beast with my enhanced agility that was even higher than the beast's. It was too dangerous to close otherwise. I hammered my strikes home at the already injured area on its side. The beast howled in pain as my strikes landed. It tried to swipe at me but pulled up short as the shackles still held it, barely. Luckily I wasn't alone in this fight. The beast tried to flick its tail at me but must have lost sight of my mount. Bella had the appendage firmly in her jaws, preventing the angry beast from bringing it into play. I also noticed Fiona's mount rushing over to help Bella hold the tail. The beast finally managed to break its shackle. I just managed to get my staff up in time to block the blow, the force of which sent me flying a good 10 feet. I landed heavily on the ground, the wind knocked out of me. The beast didn't have time to finish me off though. Fiona, her sword glowing red, slashed it between the ribs on the opposite side. The beast howled in rage again, trying to swipe at the woman, but she was nimble enough to back out of its reach. Bella and Yonel were doing a fine job of containing the animal. I could see blood spilling from the wound Fiona inflicted. She must have imbued her sword with a skill that caused bleeding. It was rare to see Fiona use her abilities. She preferred straight sword combat, or so she told me. I had a feeling she used more abilities than she let on, they were just invisible to the naked eye. I knew she had a few flashy ones though, water whip, shackle, and reflect to name a few. The Chesic was on its last legs. Our combined attacks had wounded it severely. I could see its labored breaths tinged with a bit of red foam. It was still dangerous though, so we had to be careful. I whipped a stunning gust at it as it looked away from me to track Fiona. The beast whimpered and tried to flee, but both of our mounts kept it in place. In desperation, it tried to spin around and slash and bite at Bella and Yonel to break free. They jumped back from the attack, yanking the beast off its feet. Before it could right itself, Fiona jumped in, cutting a gaping slash into its neck. The beast struggled futilely for a few more seconds before succumbing to its wounds. You have reached level 11, modifiers increased by 1 free skill slots available. No free skill slots this level, but I got a bunch of upgrades to existing skills. Rejuvenate, heals 125 HP over 30 SEC, 25M range, cost 35 mana, cooldown 30 SEC. Improved Earth Fist, deals earth damage int X.38 modifier to target within 25M range, cost 60 mana, cooldown 1 minute. Enhanced Shield, grants a shield that absorbs 18% of damage for 5 minutes, cost 50 mana, cooldown 1 minute. I was happy to see Rejuvenate get a buff to the amount it healed. Although, that seemed to come with an increased mana cost this time around. Earth Fist got a small damage boost as well. Finally, a spell I hadn't received a boost on since level 5, Shield got an increase of 3%. While it seemed small, that could be a lifesaver. I had the free skill slot and I decided to use it on an ability I passed up at an earlier level. Imbue your weapon with elemental damage for 60 minutes. Must choose damage type when activating the skill, cannot be changed while active, cost 50 mana, cooldown 60 minutes. I planned on trying something with my old staff and my new skill when we got to the next dungeon. I also glanced at Fiona, she was still level 12. How close are you to hitting level 13? I would say I am about 80% of the way there. When we met I had only been level 12 for a month. My world is not as savage as yours, so opportunities to level are few and far between. Honestly, your rise in levels is frightening, especially that mages. I slapped myself, I had completely forgotten to tell Fiona about how they leveled so quickly. So much had happened since that day that it had slipped my mind. I rectified that situation now. That's utterly deplorable, Fiona said after I finished telling her about the slave contracts and the black dragon's likely use for so many slaves. I agree, and they need to be stopped, but we aren't even close to being strong enough to stop them. Eventually, I will have to head for Chicago to see about disrupting their activities. If we let them keep leveling like this, nothing in the world will be able to stand against them. In the end, we could all be slaves. I saw Fiona's mood sour at the mention of me going alone to Chicago. She knew she had to return to her commander when her contact finally transported over from her world. Honestly, I would love to just say, you know what, screw the black dragons, I'm going to go be happy. But we both had responsibilities neither of us liked. Fiona interrupted my dour mood. Hey, look over there. I looked in the direction she was pointing. Dark plumes of smoke rose over the tree line in the distance, in the direction of the bazaar. That can't be good. We better go check it out before hitting the dungeon. All right. I'll finish up quickly and we can mount up and see if we can offer any help. Fiona finished her work at looting and skinning the Chesic. The pelt went into the bag for the sergeant. The meat we split and dumped into the portable stables for our mounts, since predator meat was usually not very edible for humans. I mounted Bella and Fiona mounted Yonel, then we were off, quickly making our way towards the smoke in the distance. Chapter 32, Conflict. We rode towards the smoke as quickly as our mounts could move. It seemed to be coming from the overpass bridge. The very same bridge we took the first time we entered the city. While not the only entrance to the city, from this side of town it was the most convenient. We rode past a few other entrances that had been blocked off or were too far from the main road for ease of use. I doubted the city, or any cities for that matter, would remain this spread out in the future. It was likely the cities would be walled off, making safe zones for non-combatants to protect them from roaming monsters. It would also help position the soldiers at easily defensible choke points like our overpass. We zipped down city streets, the raver beasts easily navigating even the concrete roads. We were closing in on the checkpoint. There was still some smoke, and from this close, I realized it wasn't coming from the crossing. It was farther in the city, perhaps near where the army headquarters might be. Whatever it was, it didn't bode well for the citizens. We came around the corner of the building, the checkpoint was now in sight. Before I could react, bullets started zipping past us. Oh, shit! Get down! I yelled, spurring Bella back behind the building as the automatic weapon's fire became more accurate. Bella let out a yowl of pain. She was struck with a few rounds before we could safely get back to cover. Are you injured? My heart pounded as we made it to safety. I jumped out of the saddle, quickly casting Rejuvenate on Bella. It was quite different to be shot at by a pistol or rifle vs a light machine gun. The system could mitigate the damage some, but these were large rounds. We both took a few hits, Fiona said through gritted teeth. I looked at her, and the bleeding wound in her gut. Blood was already pooling on the ground under her. I hit her with Healing Touch. I expected she would need more, a gut wound was bad. I pulled out one of my health injectors and stuck it into Yonel. He hissed at me and tried to bite me, but I was able to avoid the half-hearted attempt. I had not been hit by any of the bullets. Finally, Lady Luck had smiled upon me, instead of pimp slapping me. I cast another Healing Touch on Fiona and her bleeding finally stopped. I could still hear sporadic gunfire rake the building we were hiding behind. The thick masonry seemed to be enough to keep us safe, for now. We need to move, they are probably going to try to pin us down so they can surround us. Those didn't look like soldiers, Fiona said, storing her mount. I didn't get a good look, so I will take your word for it. I stored my mount as well. While fast, they would make too large of a target. We needed to do some surveillance to see what was going on. I had an idea who it might be, but it needed to be verified. It would be much easier to do so without large animals trailing us. This would also give us the opportunity to cut through houses and side streets, making it easier to avoid any unwanted attention, until we could find another way across the freeway. Waiting until night wouldn't be an option. It was early morning and I doubted our enemy would wait for us to respond. I racked my brain trying to think of a way to bypass the checkpoints as we made our way south through the neighborhoods. A few times we had to duck into a house as we saw armed groups running down the street. This was when I got my first good look at who was attacking the town. And wouldn't you guess it, the damn black dragons had arrived. You think these men are from the garrison to the north? Fiona just shrugged. I don't see where else they could have come from. If the man you questioned gave you accurate information. So 100 mid to high single-digit fighters with possibly over 1,000 slaves forced to do their bidding. I didn't know how many soldiers were in town, but I knew they had been spread pretty thin. There had also been quite a few non-combatants as well as outsiders. Hopefully, at least some of the soldiers remained to help the citizens. Let's try to take the next patrol, it would be nice to get some questions answered. Fiona just nodded, gripping the pommel of her sword until her knuckles turned white. I could understand her feelings. After what they did to her and what they are doing to innocent people, who could blame her for wanting some revenge? We made it a few more blocks before spotting a group that would work. Only one in the group was wearing an armband, the others sported slave collars. The slaves wielded weapons, but the Black Dragon member wasn't sporting a weapon at all. Magic user, I hissed to Fiona. Let me engage him, while you keep the others busy. Try not to kill them, if you can help it, she said, looking troubled. I would try my best, but I gave the woman no guarantee to their safety. If she could finish off the mage with the armband quickly, it shouldn't be a problem. If not, then it was them or us, and I would always choose us. I charged out from behind the building, yelling to draw their attention. Fiona sprinted off through an alley, to get the drop on the mage. All six turned to look at me. I saw the mage giving them orders. The 5 slaves rushed towards me. Hell, one bolted towards me like an Olympic sprinter, iron bar raised, ready to bash me over the head. The man's burst of speed shocked me for a second. It wasn't nearly as pronounced as my blink step, but it was significant. I checked the sprinter's information. Fleetfoot / Berserker level 4. Another surprise. This was the first dual-classed person I had run across. The fact that he had hit level 4, even with the XP hit, meant he had done a lot of fighting. He was still quite a distance away, even with whatever skill he used. I took the time to examine his friends. One appeared to be a beast girl. Silver Fang level 7. Silver Fang was an odd class name. The fact that she was a silver-eared cat girl with what looked like razor-sharp claws made me wonder if this might be an advanced class. Next up was a beefy mountain of a man, carrying a sledgehammer. The weapon had to have a face on it larger than my head. Stone Crusher level 5. The next one to the party seemed odd. He looked to be part human, part machine. Cyber Soldier level 6. The last one and also the slowest was a frail old lady, carrying a long cane. Totem level 8. I remembered the class from one of my possible choices. I knew it was capable of buffing and healing, and I could already see she was pulling out little carved figurines. Well, guess I get to see if I made the right choice in class, I thought as I activated Blink Step. I blurred past all the fighters, deciding to try and disable the older lady first. I hit the old lady with a stunning gust. It was one of my weakest abilities. She doubled over as the attack hit her, but the stun didn't activate. I raced back to my original position just as my spell faded. I swear I gave the group whiplash. Their heads whipping back and forth to try and track me. The stunned slaves halted for half a second before they all looked at me, anger in their eyes. "You harmed Granny," the berserker bellowed in rage. "Geez, these people acted like they weren't just about to beat me to death, and yet I'm the bad guy." I looked behind the venerable Granny, seeing the mage engaged with Fiona. He was putting up a decent fight, but I could tell Fiona had the upper hand. I didn't have any fear of her losing to the mage. Our practice together showed me how capable she was. She deftly avoided some spells and knocked others right back at the caster, trying to break his shield. It was easy to tell she had fought wizards before, and if it wasn't for the 5 annoying flies buzzing at me, I would love to watch her dismantle this individual. The berserker was now close enough to take a swing at me with his metal pipe. I utilized the footwork old man Trumbo taught me. Spinning to the side to avoid the blow. I wrenched my staff into the back of his knee and pulled, causing him to do some painful splits. Before he could retaliate, I dipped out of range, knocking his pipe away with a quick spin of my staff. I reset my stance, ready for the next opponent. I smiled. Of course, it was the beautiful cat girl, every weeaboo's dream. She slashed at me with her silver claws, leaving glowing trails in the air behind them. I leaned back from her swipe and bopped her on the nose with my hand. It was quite easy. My stats were much higher than hers. "Bad kitty," I said, waving a finger at her. She hissed at me and flattened her ears. My god, was it cute, ahem, in a kitten sort of way. She was so mad she failed to react as I cast Earth Fist under her foot, spinning her off to the side to impact the berserker that had just recovered his footing. Time to see if she had the reflexes of a cat. She did not. She collided with the man, knocking them both to the ground. I was probably enjoying this more than I should. Fighting, just for the sake of fighting, was amazing. Too bad it was almost always followed by fighting for the sake of surviving. The Stone Crusher arrived and swung down at me with a powerful overhead strike. His massive hammer glowed red from some ability. I tried to back up but noticed my feet wouldn't move. I didn't have time to look down to see what was restricting my movement, but I could guess who did it. I had two choices as the hammer fell. I decided to save my trump card for later. Instead, using godly might to enhance my strength. My staff disappeared into my ring as I raised both of my arms to intercept the strike. My arms strained as they absorbed the blow. Only the Stone Crusher's surprise allowed me to wrench the weapon from his grip. I tossed the weapon away and the man took a step back in uncertainty. I knew it was a risk to block the weapon with my hands, but I wanted to save my other spell in case I ran into Charla and her cronies. Sure, I could multicast it, but that would leave me with little mana left to fight with. Because of my choice, I took a fair bit of damage from the Stone Crusher's empowered blow, but not nearly as much as I could have. My health dropped 156 points and I had to hand it to the guy. For his level, that was a pretty impressive strike. But now it was my turn and I had a new skill to test out. I imbued my staff with electrical damage and flicked the blunt end out. He wasn't able to dodge back in time. The man's muscles locked up as the elemental lightning coursed through his body. I took this brief respite to look down towards my feet, seeing that they were encased in vines. I gave the old lady a disbelieving look and she just shrugged at me. I sighed, cutting the vines away before the last attacker finally trundled his way up to me. For a half-man, half-robot he was quite overweight. At least that's what it looked like at first. As he got closer I saw it was some sort of metal plating that made him look bigger than he was. "Alright Tin Man, want to dance with some electricity?" I said, giving him an evil smile while spinning my crackling staff menacingly. The man looked horrified but was unable to oppose his orders as he continued his approach. "This is going to hurt you a lot more than it's going to hurt me." I sprinted forward, now free from the vines. Just before I reached the man I saw him raise his arm. My instincts screamed for me to dodge, and who was I to argue? I leaped to the side, avoiding a red beam meant to slice me in two. "That's no fair, I wanted a laser arm." The cyber soldier tried to readjust his aim but his agility was very low. I managed to get back up and sprint to his opposite side. I tapped him lightly on the arm with my staff as I passed. That was enough for the elemental damage to cross over into him. It seemed like he was highly susceptible to electrical damage. His arms went limp as he seemed to shut down, falling over backward. I knew he wasn't dead. I didn't receive any experience, so at least that was a positive. Looking over I saw the totem readying another ability. She pulled out an almost finished carving. The item appeared to be about a foot long. It looked like she only needed to add some final touches. I admired her foresight. Truly it was a brilliant strategy, having almost finished totems. It meant she could quickly add the missing details, producing whatever totem she required. I couldn't get to her in time unless I multicast Blink Step. No matter what I thought, it just felt wrong beating up an old lady. Fiona was still fighting the mage, but I decided to pull out my other trump card anyway. I pulled the Black Dragon armband from my inventory and put it on. "Stop attacking!" All 5 stopped what they were doing. Well, 4 of them did, the 5th was still rebooting. I was glad the command worked. I was more glad that all 5 didn't attack me together. If they had, I would have been forced to go all out, and it would have likely ended in at least a few deaths. It was almost like they were trying to do the bare minimum their orders required, well, all except the berserker, who got angry after I attacked the old woman. The mage realized something was wrong and tried to yell out orders, but Fiona used his distraction to skewer him through the throat. The man grabbed at his gaping wound, trying to keep his blood in while producing a healing item from his inventory. Fiona just grabbed his hand before he could use it. The man struggled for a few more seconds, before falling over dead. "Well, that was fun," I said to the gathered slaves. "Any chance you folks could answer some questions for me?" The 5 were eager to disclose anything they could about the movements of the Black Dragon. I found out there was one lightly guarded railroad crossing 3 miles down. They also confirmed my assumptions that they had brought the entire garrison along with over 1,200 slaves to attack the city. Finally, they were able to confirm that slaves were used for leveling. The slave controllers got 65% of the experience a slave earned, no matter how far away they were. Go figure, our little chaos mage, Charla Cotton, controlled a third of the slaves in this attack group. The rest was split among 12 other individuals all over level 14. Occasionally groups of slaves would be rented out for others to quickly level, allowing more members to hit double digits, to help shore up their main fighters. The 5 weren't sure what the skill or magic was that allowed this, and could only confirm the rental part of it because they were on loan to the mage. He had wanted to level faster without putting himself at risk. "Joke's on him," I said, looking over at his corpse. "Look, you 5 need to find a safe place to ride out this insanity." They all looked at each other, unsure of what to do before Granny spoke up. "You need to order us since you are wearing the black band," she said, waving away my horrified look. "We all know you saved us, but we are still compelled by the collars." I knew I could remove the collars, but I didn't have the time right now to do it. I had a good idea of a place they should be relatively safe. Hopefully, it would be far from any black dragons. Maybe the commander could figure out how to remove their collars. I would check up on them once I dealt with our local threat. There is a town up north about 100 or so miles. I want you 5 to head there together. Protect and defend each other on the way. When you get there, find the barracks. You can't miss it, and tell the commander I sent you. Give him this and tell him what it's for," I said, handing over my last extra armband. "If you see anyone in need, try to help them, but avoid any black dragon if at all possible. I will find a way to remove your bondage. Try to stay safe." They all looked at me, tears in their eyes. It had probably been the nicest orders that they had received to date, but I couldn't have them sitting here and crying. "Go," I said quietly, and the group ran off. Hopefully, to some semblance of safety. the big guy carrying the still unconscious cyber soldier across his shoulder. I removed the armband and stuck it back in my inventory. Despite how useful it was, it left me feeling dirty. I looked over to Fiona as she approached. She must have finished searching the body for anything of value. Anything good? I asked. Small storage ring, some slave collars, a few potions, and about 100 credits. I just nodded. She killed him, so all the loot was hers to keep, but she still handed me half the health potions and half the credits. I just smiled and shook my head, not like I was going to turn down free loot and money. You ready? Yes. Did you find us a way across? Possibly, we will need to scout it out before I am sure. We headed off in the opposite direction of the freed slaves. Chapter 33, Behind Enemy Lines. The freed slaves had been correct. I was looking over the railway overpass from the second story of a house. 4 individuals were lounging behind the sandbag bunkers on the far side. There were, however, no mounted guns. I couldn't see any guns from this range, which was not necessarily a good thing. It probably meant these individuals had power enough to not need firearms. There were 2 possible ways across the bridge, quietly, or loudly. We would try the quiet approach first. You ready for this? I asked Fiona. She had argued against the plan, well, one part of the plan. She had been pretty insistent about not wearing the armband. I managed to convince her it was the only quick option we had. We needed to get across, to the city, and determine what happened to the locals. If we could save them, we would. Not really, but what choice do we have? I just grunted in response. Plan B was in the back of my mind. If this plan failed, I could probably blitz across half the bridge before my spell wore off. If we got stuck on the bridge, I don't think the battle would end well for us. I said a quick prayer to Lady Luck. We stepped out of the house and walked down the street like we belonged. Making it to the bridge had been simple. It didn't even rouse the group from the other side. That changed as we made it about a quarter of the way across. I saw one of the men notice us, slapping his companions awake. By the halfway point, all 4 had gotten to their feet and were eyeing us suspiciously. They were content to wait on the far side though. Shit, I whispered to Fiona, I think they suspect something. On 3 I will bolt across the bridge to hold them off. Try to get there as soon as you can. I glanced over and she just nodded. 1, 2. Before I got to 3, one of the men waved, "'Bout damn time they sent some replacements, we have been here all damn day." I could hear the other men grumbling about their shitty assignment as we got closer. When I got close enough, I checked their status. Brawler level 8. Hoplite level 9. Artificer level 7. And the last and seemingly leader of this group of black dragons. Evoker level 10. Unfortunately, the evoker noticed my spell. You ask how I knew this? Well. Wait, did you just scan me? Oh shit, these aren't members. Kill them, the man yelled. He wasn't the most eloquent linguist I had ever heard, but his warning did what it was intended to do. The 4 pulled weapons from storage items. It was too bad for them, I already had my weapon out. I crossed the remaining distance in less than a second. This time I didn't pull my punches, slamming my staff full force into the evoker's gut. The staff met something that resisted it for a bit. Whatever it was managed to reduce my blow, but not nearly enough. The man was sent tumbling backward a few feet, a flash of light sparking between the end of my staff and the evoker. My staff still crackled with electricity from the fight earlier. He lay on the ground twitching as the current flowed through his body. I dodged to the left as the hoplite tried to spear me in the head, managing to only take a glancing blow across my cheek. I wanted to quip at him about how I got my scar, but the brawler came in next, trying to tackle me as the artificer pulled out some sort of wand. I slammed the butt of my staff down. I had already been channeling the word of power for seismic strike. The brawler, already off balance from trying to lunge at me, fell on his face and the artificer had to drop his item as he clung to the sandbags to stay upright. I couldn't see the hoplite, so I did the smart thing and dove to the side. A searing pain erupted from my side as the sneaky bastard speared me from behind. It was a painful blow. My quick reaction the only thing keeping him from hitting anything vital. I cast Rejuvenate as I rolled to my feet, facing the 4. I was pissed, more at myself than the hoplite, but he wasn't free from my wrath. I activated Flurry, using the last second of Blink Step to show the hoplite what a real thrust was. I appeared in front of the stunned man, hitting him with my attack. My staff pistoning into his chest 12 times in less than a second. He was nowhere near fast enough to react. his shield and spear falling from his hands. 3 of my strikes activated impact and a 4th one activated my weapon's critical. My attack blew a hole through the man's torso. A glance at my damage notice showed I did over 1,300 damage to the man. Whoops, a bit overkill and also painful. My abused muscles and open wound protesting from the rapid attacks I had just performed. I turned to take on the other 3 men. After seeing what I did to their buddy they started running. Fiona managed to catch up to the injured evoker, easily cutting him down. In a last-ditch attempt to save himself he threw a fireball at her. She redirected the attack towards the other 2, hitting the brawler in the back. The spell exploded, knocking both him and the artificer to the ground. I could see both struggling to rise, smoke and charred flesh covered their backs. Fiona was close enough to shackle both of them. With their injuries, they didn't have enough strength left to fight off the spell. She approached them both, sliding her sword through their backs and into their hearts without a second thought. After she was done she flicked her blade to remove the blood. I had no complaints about her actions. All 4 of these men wore the black dragon armbands. While she checked the other bodies I looted the hoplite. Other than his spear and shield, which I tossed into the storage ring he was wearing, he just had a few miscellaneous other items. Some food, a few of the slave collars, a pack of playing cards, and 500 credits. All in all, we collected 4 storage rings that we split between us. I tied mine to a strap of leather inside my armor since you couldn't store storage items inside other storage items. The 2,250 credits we split evenly between us. In total there was another dozen slave collar along with some food, rope, and a pistol. I pocketed the pistol and ammo into my ring because you never know, it might come in handy someday. I also had an evil idea on how to use these collars. Let's hide these bodies and find a safe place for a few minutes, I want to try something. Fiona agreed. We hauled the dead bodies to a convenient nearby dumpster. It was nice that we were putting these men where they belonged, I mused, heaving the last man in and closing the lid. We found a small shop that was surprisingly unlocked. After we made sure it was clear we moved to the back room. So what is so important that we need to stop now that our goal is in sight? You remember when I was testing the collars to remove yours? Yes, she said, shivering at the memory. Well, one of my tests exploded. Thankfully it didn't do much damage, probably because I hadn't been aiming for that effect. The thing is, I think I can enhance that effect. But how are you going to keep them stable? She started to say, but stopped to think about it. You're hoping the storage rings will keep them in stasis until you pull them out. That's an awfully dangerous plan. What if they go off as soon as you take it out? It may sound weird but I can almost feel how long it takes the power to build up before catastrophic failure occurs. It may not be perfectly accurate. I believe with my improved rune crafting skill I should be able to keep them stable enough to last 10 to 15 seconds but that's why we're here. I need to test that theory. Fine, but let's be quick about it. I will keep watch at the front of the store. Try not to blow yourself up, she said as she walked out of the back room. I didn't waste any time. Pulling out 3 collars, my carving tools, and one of the other storage rings. I sure as hell wasn't going to use my larger ring for this test. No, these piddly 1 cubic foot rings would work fine. As an afterthought, I decided to transfer my old staff to the other ring tied behind my armor, then got to carving. Sweat beaded my brow and I flew through the carving process as quickly as was safely possible. My first attempt had to toss into a ring immediately. As soon as it was finished it gave off an imminent feeling of exploding. The ring idea worked since I was still alive. After that, I decided to take a little more time making the last 2 samples. I could feel the power building inside the collars but at a slightly slower pace so I put them in the other ring I had tucked away. My runes had converted the magical energy meant to compel a slave into a fragmentation grenade. I didn't expect them to be all that useful, more of a surprise for anyone that came across them. I figured they might be enough to confuse or disrupt a few enemies. Plus they were super easy to throw. Almost acting like frisbees. The unstable one was in one ring, I didn't want to accidentally pull that one out and have it go off in my face. It's not like the storage could differentiate between the collars. To the system, they were still all the same items. I wondered why that was. The system recognized my rune-crafted armor, but not the rune-modified collars. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that they were already magically enhanced. It was just another thing to test in the future. Despite my failure with the first ring, I had an idea of how it could be used. I chuckled just thinking about it. Fiona came back into the room. We have more company, they are a few blocks out, heading this way. Perfect, you remember that building near the bridge? The large blue one? Yup, go meet me in there, I gotta go leave a gift for our friends. She huffed, okay, fine, just be careful, okay. Won't take me but a minute, I said, smiling. I set the ring down in the pool of blood left by the hoplite. It was very conspicuous, all shiny, surrounded by congealing blood. Hopefully, it would be enough to draw their attention. After placing the ring, I ran off to meet Fiona. She should be waiting in the blue building, a good 100 or so feet away. So care to tell me what you're up to? She asked as I entered the building. So, in essence, I turned the collars into powerful grenades. Using the innate magic in my runes to cause the power to build, until I either say the trigger word or the energies can't be contained anymore. Either outcome would work fine for me. They should be enough to kill or severely injure anyone within 10 feet of the blast. But what if they detonate other magical items, won't that enhance the blast? I had to think about it for a second, it's not likely. Roscoe was bored. After the initial push into this town, there had been little in the way of fighting, which meant little in the way of leveling. That meant the 3 slaves he had painstakingly acquired, using his 3 allotted slave collars, were practically useless. He could purchase more from the bazaar but wouldn't gain the same benefit as the ones from the Black Dragon. More of those enhanced collars would only come if he ranked up within the organization. This was why he was in such a foul mood. He couldn't rank up unless he leveled up, and he couldn't level up unless his slaves had something to fight. His foul mood caused even Dimitri to avoid speaking to him. And to top it off, he had a full 6-hour rotation at the least likely checkpoint to be used. Of course, he dragged his feet getting here. He knew the crew on duty, they wouldn't dare report him. As they approached the barricade, Roscoe sensed something was wrong. The first thing he noticed was nobody was manning the post. He stopped well clear of the sandbag bunker, putting his hand out to stop his friend Dimitri. They stood in the open, while pre-system this would be a terrible idea. Post-system it gave him a clear line of sight to everything around and more than enough time to activate his mage shield. Most spells had limited range, and even with enhanced abilities, it would take time for anyone to clear the 200 or so feet to where they stood. You 3 go check it out, he said to the 3 slaves. All 3 were below level 5, but even their paltry skills had pushed Roscoe to level 8, almost level 9. Unlike Dimitri, who was a scout/sniper that utilized his bow, Roscoe was a geomancer that specialized in close combat, with magical rocky armor. It made him nearly indestructible but extremely slow. At least until he got his upgraded skill at level 10. He could see the slaves hurrying back, one was holding something in his hand. We found a pool of blood and signs of a fight. Also, this ring, master, the one slave said, handing him the ring. Dimitri walked over to see. You 3 spread out and keep your eyes open, let me know if you spot anything. All 3 complied as they should. Well, what is it? Dimitri asked in his thick Russian accent. Feels like a storage ring, I bet whoever attacked here missed it. Let's see what's inside. That's odd, Roscoe said, a frown forming on his face. He had expected to find credits, food, and 3 collars, but there was only 1 collar. He didn't recall anyone from their team capturing slaves. Perhaps they had managed to collar 2, but then where were they? Well, his Russian friend said eagerly. Roscoe pulled the collar from the ring and regretted doing so almost immediately. He could feel the raging power inside, even see it, as the disc began to glow. He tried stuffing it back inside the storage device when it went off. Chapter 34, Stirring Up Trouble. The concussion wave of a massive blast was both felt and heard, even from our position. Which should not have been possible. At most, we should have heard a small popping sound and not felt anything. Something had gone sideways in a big way. I looked at my combat messages, there were 5 new entries. Geomancer takes 715 damage. Scout/sniper takes 670 damage. Fencer takes 278 damage. Guardian takes 256 damage. Voidstalker takes 255 damage. Oh hell, that was a lot more damage than should have been possible. I popped my head out of the building to see the destruction. A crater a good 10 feet across dominated the area, along with 3 mostly intact bodies. There was no sign of the other 2. What worried me most was the large plume of smoke that now dominated the area. Okay, we need to move, now, I said, rushing from the building and heading away from the area. At this point, it didn't matter where we headed, as long as it wasn't here. We must have covered 3 miles before we stopped. Along the way, we had to avoid 3 groups of black dragons that were rushing towards the explosion site. These were much larger groups of between 10 and 15 people. Mostly, slaves, I noticed sourly. They must be response units, I whispered to Fiona, who nodded in reply. We waited a few minutes after the last group ran out of sight, before stepping out to continue towards our first destination. The Army's headquarters, where we spoke with Sergeant Cunningham. I hoped the place was still standing. It was obvious as we got closer that the smoke we spotted earlier had indeed come from their compound. I knew from the frequent sounds of gunfire in the distance that the city had at least a few holdouts. It took us another 10 minutes and one more fight with a small patrol of 3 low-level Black Dragon members to reach the HQ. Bodies littered the street. A cursory glance showed they were mostly slaves, with a few Black Dragon members and soldiers mixed in. "Oh God, there must be over 100 dead," Fiona said, shocked. Seeing this many dead innocents shocked me as well. The poor unwilling pawns had been force-fed into a grinder. I had a feeling the main checkpoint would have looked similar. The Black Dragons didn't care about individual lives, these people were resources in their goals. Whatever those goals may be. I doubt they even cared much about the members that fell here. The bodies left to rot along with the slaves. Looking around, the area was clear and quiet. The front gate had been blasted aside, not that I was all that surprised. Wisps of smoke still curling over the wall from what I could only assume had been the armory, a now smoking crater. It was possible something survived. I wasn't about to try to dig through that mess. Especially with hostiles all over the area. "Come on, we need to go see if there are any survivors," I said, waving Fiona to follow. I kept looking left and right as we neared the main gate, expecting an army of black dragons to pour out from every corner to attack us. Nothing came out to meet us as we passed through the dead, making sure to avoid stepping on the bodies as much as possible. I could feel the bile rising in my throat. The pervasive stench of iron and viscera clinging to the inside of my nostrils. My shoes making sucking sounds as I stepped through the congealing blood, impossible to avoid as we got closer to the gate. I peered through the torn opening, seeing more bodies on the other side. It looked like most were soldiers, but there was a scattering of slaves and a few more Black Dragon members. At least they put up a fight. I wonder why the bodies were left. From what I could tell, all the Black Dragon bodies still had their gear. I could even see a few rings, but we didn't have time to search the bodies. We needed to see if anyone was left alive. To that end we made our way to the sergeant's command building. The simple house still stood, but it had seen better days. I could see the doors had been smashed open, but no bodies were littered out front. Stepping inside revealed the place to be a mess, but again no bodies, not even any signs of blood. Looks like they may have survived the attack and were able to flee. "I think you may be alright," Fiona was saying before a creak sounded down the hall. We both went deadly silent, waiting to see if the noise returned. After a few seconds, we heard it again and I motioned Fiona to take the lead. She was much lighter on her feet than I was. We slowly made our way down the hallway, trying to remain as quiet as possible. The noises continued, appearing to come from the last room on the left. If I recalled correctly, this was the Cunningham's office. The door was slightly open and I could hear the soft rustling of papers and the squeak of desk drawers opening. It sounded like someone was looking for something. We each covered one side of the door. I remembered this room not having a window. So that meant they had to come out eventually. I heard a whispered voice, "It's not here, could they have taken it?" "I don't know, but we need to leave before they come back or a patrol comes through." Fine, the last voice said as he opened the door. I grabbed the startled man as he let out a surprised squeak, pushing him up against the wall. Fiona ran into the room and secured the second individual. I could see my man was wearing standard-issue army attire, but that didn't mean much. It could have easily been stolen. "Who are you?" I said in an angry hiss. Checking him with Identify, making sure to enable his name. "Corporal Fred Jenkins, Intelligence Officer Level 6. I saw the man glance at my arms and neck, likely looking for the signature armband or collar. I could see him relax a little, seeing that I had neither. "Corporal Jenkins. Wait. I remember you and your partner came in here to speak with the sergeant. Look, we need to return to the fallback point before we are captured." Fiona dragged the other soldier out and I checked him as well. "Specialist Harold Wellman, Scout Level 6. I released the corporal and he brushed himself off while looking at us both. Were you in town when the attack hit? No, we saw the smoke and managed to make our way through the blockade. Was that explosion your doing? If so, you did us a big favor, it pulled most of the local patrols and we were able to come out of hiding. Unfortunately, we don't have the fallback coordinates as they should have been here, he said, pointing to the room. Wait, you don't know where the rest of your force went? Not exactly, we had 4 possible locations, I know each one, but it's too dangerous to search them all with this many enemy forces scattered about. Also, it's possible the enemy already has all the locations. Well, the way I see it, you have a few choices. You can follow us, you can go on your own, or you can follow the gunfire to see if you can locate some more friendlies. And what are your plans? The corporal asked. Easy, try to save as many civilians as possible while also hampering any efforts of the Black Dragons. I guess that makes our choice easy enough. We will come with you. Although, neither of us has a weapon and our skills aren't really combat focused. I remembered I had the pistol, so I took it out and handed it the corporal. He shook his head. Give it to Specialist Wellman here, he is a much better shot. If we find more, I'll take the next one. On our way out from the compound, we checked a few of the bodies. I removed any storage rings from the Black Dragons we came across, stuffing them into my boots to look through later. We did manage to find another pistol and M16 rifle along with a few magazines of ammo. The corporal took the pistol and now the specialist had 2 weapons. Well, 3 if you included the maces I gave to each of them. The scout actually came in quite handy on our trip. He could sense hostiles within a certain range, allowing us to avoid a few patrols and letting us know it was clear. I checked anyway just to be extra cautious. Trust but verify. Okay, where to? I asked our guides. Well, the first place they could have gone was to link up with the matron and her people. I grumbled at that thought. I didn't really want to interact with the cantankerous old crone again. I was also starting to suspect that she had an ability that allowed her to leech experience due to her high level. The only other explanation was that she was an outsider like Fiona. She sounded normal, but who was to say she didn't have some weird skill that allowed her to mimic speech patterns? I also felt like this mess was partially her doing. If she hadn't hired Fiona and me to stir up trouble with the Black Dragon, maybe they would have held off the assault longer. Then again, maybe they would have attacked sooner. Too late to change the past. Fine, we can head that way, but I suggest we steer clear of the bazaar. I suspect that securing that building was the Black Dragon's true goal here. Everyone nodded at that and we moved off towards the last known location of the matron, her impromptu market. As we were transitioning across an intersection, Specialist Wellman was struck by an arrow through his leg. The man went down, screaming in pain. I looked up the street to see a group of 8 running towards us. Apparently, they were well outside of the scouts' detection range, or they had some ability to mask their presence. Fiona used her impressive sword skills to bat away the next arrow as I grabbed the injured man, lifting him onto my shoulder. We bolted across the intersection, Fiona holding off the incoming projectiles. Once we got into cover, I could remove the arrow and heal him. Another arrow whizzed by my head and I ran harder. As I cleared the intersection, I set the man down, none too gently. Sorry, but this is going to hurt. Way, he began to say as I snapped the arrow in 2 and pulled it out. He let out a scream, but I quickly cast Rejuvenate on him, the wound healing over in a few seconds. We're going to have to fight, I said to the group. I could see both soldiers nod, they already had their guns out. I pulled my old staff out, it was time to try something, and if it backfired I didn't want to damage my good staff. Fiona gave me a curious look but otherwise remained silent. Luckily the group had been buffed by me as we set out and I didn't need to refresh any of them soon. I was about to cast Impact on my staff again but thought better of it. No, if I wanted this to work I would need to cast as few skills as possible on my iron-tipped staff. I took a deep breath and cast Imbue, selecting Earth as the element. Unlike the electrical damage I used before, this time the staff seemed to take on additional weight. Next, I used Multicast followed by Imbue again. This time I choose Fire as the element. It worked, I wasn't sure it would at first. The staff seemed to groan in protest as the dual elements combined, causing the rocky-covered ends to start to crack and glow an ominous red color. The heat that poured off of the staff was tremendous, even to the point that my allies took a step back. I was sweating from the heat, but I would bear it. Prepared to bolt and launch the staff at any point if it looked or felt like it was about to explode. Eventually, the staff settled in my hand, the ends glowing fiercely with molten rock. The only reason I tried this was due to the spell's text, saying it couldn't be changed while active. I could hear shouts, the enemies were closing in. I gave Fiona a wink, she just shook her head. Then I cast Blink Step, leaving a glowing trail behind me. My abrupt move stunned the three closest, they just so happened to be slaves. I blew past, the heat trail scorching them as I passed. My target was the commanders, and here came one of the stooges now. Archer level 9. I used all my impressive speed and strength to smash my staff into the man's side as I ran past him to get to the next. I didn't feel the normal impact of my staff, but I did feel an enormous wave of heat. I had to glance back to see what happened. It appeared that the molten stone coating my staff had splattered off and onto the unfortunate individual. I could see the fire spreading along the man's clothing, his attempts at archery forgotten as he tried to rid himself of the sticky burning rock. All of this happened in a heartbeat as I continued my approach to the second target. Shield bearer level 10. Seeing what happened to his ally, the man was quick enough to get his shield up. I slammed my staff down with a powerful overhead strike, enhanced by my forward momentum. The shield dented in where my staff landed, pushing the man back a few feet. He managed to remain on his feet, but that wasn't the best part. My impact left a large glowing pool of lava sticking to his metal shield. I gotta say, the man did not handle that very well. He screeched and flailed around trying to get the shield or the molten rock off. He eventually managed to discard the quickly heating shield. I used that opportunity to slap him upside the head with my staff, setting his greasy hair alight. A human torch is not a pretty sight. The man screamed, trying to use his hands to put out the flames, only managing to spread the lava onto those same hands. I ducked back as a third man swung at me with a massive cleaver that was glowing a putrid yellow color. Vile Cutter level 12. I slapped away his next attack with my staff, taking a grazing slice to my arm and throwing bits of glowing lava around. You have been infected. I looked at the debuff icon. You are suffering from rotting death, 5 damage every second for 45 seconds. That was one nasty debuff. I clenched my teeth as the vile substance seemed to tear at my insides. I stepped back and glanced over the battlefield. The soldiers were engaged with the slaves as Fiona fought off the last 2 attackers. I could see at least one was heavily wounded from Fiona already. My opponent tried to take advantage of this moment to cut into me again, but I stepped out of his reach, casting Earth Fist. The man managed to avoid most of my attack, but the spell still cut a line up his leg. We circled each other looking for an opening, and I took the opportunity to try and cleanse myself of the infection. This made the man angry, and I assumed he stacked damage using whatever skill he had. Oh well, I didn't have time to play with him. I rushed in and our weapons clashed repeatedly. This man was easily as fast as I was, perhaps even a bit faster, as none of my attacks were landing. Sweat was pouring off of me from the heat caused by my staff. I needed to end this. So I did something I would probably regret. On my next attack, I cast Flurry of Blows, hammering through his defense to strike him 4 times out of 12. One would have been enough as the man was coated by molten rock. At first, I thought the man was able to shrug off the attack as he was silent. I only realized after that his lungs had been seared shut by the heat and he wasn't able to scream. I felt the staff start to fracture, my added spell destabilizing the item. I threw it as far as I could and ran in the opposite direction. By this time Fiona had taken down her 2 targets and the soldiers were down to the last one. I was thrown to the ground a moment later by a monumental whoosh of superheated air as the staff finally failed. I pushed myself off the ground. Looking around, I could see everyone getting up, they had all been knocked to the ground as well. I hit the last enemy with an Earth Fist, finishing them off, and cast Healing all around. Looking back, I could see a small volcano with a glowing pool of lava that rose up about 5 feet. What I didn't expect was Identify to activate as I studied what had happened. Lava Elemental level XX. You have discovered a new location, do you wish to name it? I groaned. Sure, call it the lava field. You have earned 500 XP for naming an unknown landmark. I could see a small football-sized blob of living lava pull itself out from the top of the miniature volcano. Upon seeing the people close to its home, it screeched. It pulled its amorphous body from the lava and ran over to the closest dead body, burning it to ash. I shuddered. Time to go, I said, running up to the rest of the group. What the hell is that? Fiona said, pointing her sword at the elemental. Yes, so apparently when my staff exploded it created the lava elemental. I didn't think it was all that bad, but the look of horror on her face told me it probably was worse than I thought. I also made a note to probably not try that again anytime soon. Or at least use a better weapon when I did. Chapter 35, Missing Locals. I surveyed the courtyard where Grumpy Granny had her market. The area was dead silent. Missing from the scene was any indication of a battle at all. There were no bodies, no destruction, simply nothing. All that remained were empty parking spots and a few pieces of debris, marking out the one-time mass of stalls and local merchants. So, where do you think they all went? I asked the two soldiers that were tagging along. I'm not sure, Corporal Jenkins said as he looked up and down the street from our hiding spot in an apartment over some junky little dive bar. How about you, Wellman? Sense any enemies nearby? I watched the man concentrate for a bit before he replied. I'm not picking up anything with my skill, but as you know its range is limited. I just nodded, hard to forget the ambush we just ran into 15 minutes ago. Well, we need to check it out, keep your eyes open for any hostiles or possible clues. It was a quick trip downstairs and then across the street from the building we were occupying. The market was only another block down and we made sure to scan the surroundings carefully before we headed over. There wasn't a soul in sight. Not even a single body or speck of blood. We split up, looking the parking lot over to try and figure out what happened. Hey, look at this, Specialist Wellman said, calling us over. We all looked down at light grey marks on the road, leading away from the area. Drag marks, Wellman said, pointing off towards the direction of downtown. After he pointed them out I could see them more clearly following the road. You think they all packed up and headed to the bazaar? I asked. Safest place to hide, at least until it shuts down for the night, Jenkins said. I never really understood why the bazaar shut down like that. I had asked Fiona but she didn't know either, having only been to the place a handful of times. She suggested it might have something to do with the magic that allowed it to exist, perhaps needing to be refreshed. I figure we have about 4 hours until that happens, he added. Well, now we had a time limit to try and do something. What that something was, I wasn't sure. Perhaps locate the remnants of the National Guard and Sergeant Cunningham's command. Maybe try to locate and take out as many Black Dragon members as possible or recon the bazaar to see what was going on there. None were great options. How far to the next fallback point? I asked. Jenkins pulled out his small map, checking the location before tucking it away again in his pocket. About 5 blocks east. Should take us another 15 minutes if we hurry. I realized we probably wouldn't have time to complete all our goals. My thoughts were punctuated by sporadic gunfire in the distance. I looked toward Jenkins but he just shook his head, guess that was the wrong direction. All right, let's go. We can't get bogged down in any fights, so aim to disable and we can withdraw. All three nodded. As we moved along Fiona walked up beside me. This would be much faster on our mounts, she stated. I knew she was right but we couldn't carry the 2 men with us in that case and it was dangerous for just them to go alone. We hadn't run into any recent patrols, in fact, the number of enemy patrols seemed to lessen as we got closer to downtown. We may have to split up after if the next location turns out to be a bust, I said quietly. She just nodded, returning to her place in our formation. We stood far enough apart to not be taken out by a single attack, yet close enough to support each other. Although we weren't sprinting, we were moving at a good jog. Nobody seemed to have any issues keeping up but I could see Jenkins huffing and puffing a bit more than the rest of us. We only stopped before crossing intersections to make sure they were clear. Otherwise, we kept up the pace, time was running short. Again the area was eerily still and I was starting to get nervous. Looking at the others I could see they seemed jittery as well. Despite our nerves, nothing jumped out at us as we approached the building where the fallback position was supposedly it. The building was an old bomb shelter, going by the plaque near the entrance. The corporal headed up the stairs to open the door while I turned my head to scan our surroundings. At that moment I was hit by a wet slap and a concussive force that threw me from my feet. My head was ringing and my hearing had been affected by the blast. I knew I needed to get up but I was struggling to rise. Finally able to stand I looked around. The area was covered in dust and I couldn't see more than a few feet. I scanned the party menu to see what everyone's status was. Fiona was injured slightly, Specialist Wellman had remained unhurt but Corporal Jenkins was dead. Whatever trap he set off obliterated his body and the wet slap I felt was likely bits of him hitting me. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford the mana cost to use second chance on the 2 soldiers. I doubt it would have helped in this situation anyway. Checking my health I noticed I had taken almost 300 damage from the blast, or perhaps from being peppered by shrapnel, despite all my buffs and resistances. I started casting heals on myself, which was difficult since I couldn't hear. Eventually, I succeeded in getting the healing spell off. With the temporary loss of hearing and the dust, I had not noticed Fiona's struggle. She was fighting against 3 opponents, and Wellman was firing his rifle on full auto at 2 more, keeping them from getting closer. That left another 3 heading straight for me. "Look, guys, I'm really not in the mood," I said, barely able to make out my words over the ringing in my ears as the healing worked to repair the damage. They seemed nonplussed and continued towards me. I sighed. "Okay, no more good cop," I said, activating imbue, selecting wind as my element, then flurry and blink step as the closest man tried to launch something at me. Spearman level 8. I glanced at the other 3. Dervish level 9. Sapper level 7. Vindicator level 13. I easily dodged the thrown spear with my enhanced agility and blurred towards the sapper. You might ask, why not go for the highest level person first? Just a little payback for poor Jenkins, since he was likely the one that set the booby trap. I think even he was surprised as I barreled towards him, trying in vain to raise his club to block my strike. I simply pulled my staff back, just enough to avoid his clumsy swing before thrusting it forward with all my might, splattering his brains all over the Vindicator, whom I conveniently lined up for a facial. This brought the man to a halt as he tried to wipe the gore from his face and spit it out of his mouth. The dervish came at me with his curved swords trying to carve me up, but he was about 4 levels shy of being a true threat. Especially since my sparring sessions with Fiona, who was much more skilled and much quicker. I slapped his swords off to the side, spinning around behind him using the momentum of my strike. With a flick, I sent the bladed end of my staff to the back of his neck. The man fell to the ground, his spinal cord severed. Since he wasn't dead, I followed it up with an earth fist to his head, causing it to pop up like a ball from one of those automatic pitching machines. I swung around, batting the head straight at the now clean Vindicator, catching him in the face. I swear their lips met. "Get a room, you two," I said, chuckling. I guess I got a bit distracted with that last one as the spearman used the opportunity to chuck another spear at me. I was able to avoid a lethal blow, but it tore a nasty gash in my shoulder as it flew by. "Fuck, that hurts," I said, my hearing starting to return. I realized I had been yelling the whole time. I looked around quickly, checking on my companions. Both were slightly injured, so I cast Rejuvenate on Fiona and Healing Touch on Wellman. This left me enough mana to test a theory. Since both of them were outside of the 10-meter radius, I felt it was safe enough. I activated Eye of the Storm before Throwy McThrowerson decided to turn me into a cocktail snack. I started spinning my staff as the spearman tried in vain to close on me, but it was too late. The winds whipped viciously around me, much more intense than my previous uses of the spell. Theory confirmed: elemental damage can increase spell effects even for my AoE spells. The spearman tried to dig his spear into the ground to hold position, but he lost the fight as his body was lifted off the ground and tossed through the air like a ragdoll. The Vindicator was having a better time of it, his heavy armor keeping him grounded but also preventing him from closing on me as my spell raged around him. The elemental energies carved furrows in the ground and occasionally struck against his armor, tearing out the fabric. It wasn't a piece of medieval armor or even something cobbled together like mine. No, this man was wearing bulletproof body plates over most of his body, making him look like a militant Pillsbury doughboy. While he wasn't fast, he was hard to hurt. I had to end my spell after 5 seconds, my mana draining down to below 50. Stepping back, I held my staff in one arm, facing the Vindicator as he rose to his feet, his armor covered by dozens of cuts. My other arm I tucked behind my back, striking an amazing pose that said, "Screw with me if you dare." In reality, I was pulling a mana injector from my ring with my hidden hand and injecting myself where he couldn't see me. My hope was he figured I was low on mana. The man popped his neck and pulled out a massive Zweihander from his storage ring. This thing had even more range than my staff did. The blade also gave off a crimson aura. I used Identify on it. Blood Drinker. Apparently, that is all the information my skill would give me, as the blade was in use by another. It was enough for me to guess that it was a magical sword. The man also activated a skill that sent sparks zipping around him, lancing the ground occasionally. I decided to test it and sent a stunning gust his way. A glowing spark intercepted the magical attack, causing it to disperse harmlessly. It was enough clues for me to realize what type of class Vindicator was. He was a mage killer, and I had a sinking suspicion that if he got close enough that he could disrupt my shield spell and possibly my other spells and buffs with whatever aura he was using. I didn't want to let him get close enough to find out. Unfortunately, the man had other plans as he charged me, and not as he ran at me, No, he used an ability to slam into me before I could even react. I got lucky that it seemed he could only shoulder charge me and not charge with his blade out. Otherwise, I would probably have been split in half. Instead, I was sent tumbling to the ground. My instincts kicked in and I threw myself sideways, avoiding his overhead slash that slammed into the ground with tremendous force. Okay, note to self, this guy probably has a strength and endurance focused build. I managed to get to my feet and knock aside another heavy blow that almost caused me to fall again. I was able to backpedal out of his reach quicker than he could approach. Yay for high agility, I thought. I took my momentary reprieve to check my active abilities and see how my team was doing. I had been partially correct, my shield was down but all of my other abilities were still active. So apparently only external effects were negated by his aura. Good to know. The others were also faring okay. I couldn't spare the healing with my mana so low. I spun my staff, knocking his sword wide again, and stabbed forward with a quick jab. I managed to hit him but his armor took the blow. I took a slash to the arm as he pulled his sword back when I tried to duck out of reach. Blood ran down the deep gash pretty profusely but I used healing touch, draining my mana to 60. I needed to end this fight sooner rather than later but this man had the upper hand. He was fresh and I had burned almost all my mana trying to keep me and my team alive. I was just about to re-engage when a red whip of water curled around the man's neck, cleanly severing his head from his body. Blood fountained out of the neck as the body flopped over, spraying me in gore. I just raised my arms up in the air. What the hell, I totally had that guy, I said in exasperation as I turned to Fiona, noticing all her enemies were down. Yes, but we don't have time to sit and watch, she said, chastising me. That's when I noticed Wellman sitting there looting the corpses of the two he took down. I grumbled but agreed as I went to loot the other three. Well, more like two because I couldn't find where my spell tossed the spearman, I only knew that he had died. It wasn't like I was all that angry, just that my battle lust had been left unsated. I sighed again as I looted the corpses. Just your standard fare, about 100 credits, no storage rings though. I let Fiona have the Vindicator since it was technically her kill. She handed me the ring, but I saw she took the sword. Not sure it fit her fighting style so she probably meant to sell it. No biggie, when I saw the ring size I lost all interest in the sword. It had 7 cubic feet of storage. I was starting to get a large selection of storage items. I tucked my old ring into my boot after taking most of my goodies from it. I left some emergency supplies like some food, water, a health potion, and the one spear I managed to recover from Mr. Throwy. The money got was split 3 ways and I ended up another 750 credits richer. Unfortunately, this battle had cost us almost 15 minutes. I also had a feeling the other 2 locations were trapped as well. Deciding it wasn't worth going to check them since the only map was vaporized along with Corporal Jenkins. I also wasn't in fighting shape as my armor had been badly damaged in this fight. I tossed Wellman the sack for Sergeant Cunningham, get this to your commander. Since he is either dead or unreachable I consider my obligations met by giving it to one of his subordinates. Especially since the agreement on his end can't be met. So, unless you want to follow us to the bazaar to check it out, this is where we part ways, Harry. The man stopped, looked at the bodies, the remains of Jenkins, then at us. Yeah. I think I'll come with you too if you don't mind. Chapter 36, Bazaar Battle. So what was that spell back there? I asked Fiona, wondering about the ability she used on the Vindicator as we made our way to the bazaar. I knew she hadn't leveled and she wasn't the type to keep skills hidden if they would be helpful in battle. Well, I got the inspiration from watching you in the last battle. I decided to see if I could combine some of my skills. As you saw, it was quite effective. I nodded, thinking about what skills she might have combined. Obviously, she used her water whip and if I had to hazard a guess the other skill she combined with it was bleeding edge, or at least those are the names I gave her skills. It was odd to me that combining skills wasn't common knowledge, or maybe it was and there was a reason people didn't do it. I knew one possible reason, I thought, looking back on the elemental I inadvertently created. Despite that, I would continue to utilize any advantage I could get if it meant my foe's defeat and my survival in this new world. The 3 of us continued on in silence, having to duck into alleys and buildings as we got closer to downtown and the bazaar. We started to encounter more enemy patrols the closer we got. Looking at my watch, I estimated we had 40 minutes left until people were forced from the bazaar. That building over there should have a decent sight line to the bazaar, Wellman said, pointing at a 5-story apartment complex. I checked to see if it was clear, All right, let's go. Wellman rushed across the street, followed by Fiona and then myself. We made it to the front door without issue. Heading inside, while making sure to step over the broken glass and twisted metal littered in the entrance. The damage didn't look to be recent. Dust already coated the remnants of the door. Once inside, I led the party up to the 5th floor. Every door on the top floor was busted open. Looters must have passed through taking anything of value. Bullet holes and dried blood littered the walls along the hallway. We were forced into a firefight here, Wellman said, recalling the event. We just listened, letting him retell the events. We confronted them, trying to get them to leave the area. This was during the first days after the system came. You have to understand, everything was chaos around here during those first days. The looters didn't feel we had any authority to enforce our demand. In the end, they forced our hand, Wellman said, anger tinging his voice. This way, the apartment on the corner has the best view. We followed him to the end of the hall and entered the room. It was a mess, furniture and items scattered all over the place. We pushed them out of the way, making a clear path to the window. I pulled the curtain aside a bit to get a view of the bazaar. What I saw was not good. They have the entire building surrounded, I said, standing back to let the other two look for themselves. There had to be hundreds of enemies down there. I guessed most of them were slaves, but that didn't matter. It was too many to take on. I mulled over the problem while Fiona and Wellman checked out the scene. Well, that certainly isn't good, Fiona said. We don't have much time until the bazaar closes and all those people inside are forced to either fight or submit. If we had more time, I could set up more of the slave collar bombs, but I only had the 2. I could still use them, but they wouldn't be a huge game changer against this many hostiles. I think at this point all we could really do is disrupt a section of the blockade, giving the citizens the possibility of escaping or fighting. I checked on our buffs, making sure to refresh any that were close to expiring. Looks like we need to do this the hard way. Wellman, are you able to take shots from up here? The scout looked out the window again, surveying the scene. Not accurate ones. Plus I only have 3 more full magazines. That's fine. When it kicks off, try to pick your shots as best you can. Fiona, you ready for some payback? Absolutely, she said with a grim smile. The 2 of us rushed down the stairs and I handed Fiona all of my healing items and half of my mana items. At first, she tried to decline my offer. You need to take these. We are going to have to split up. I won't be able to keep track of healing you and fighting with this many enemies. Of course, she didn't like this, but she accepted it. When we got to the ground floor, she stopped me, giving me a deep kiss before saying, "Stay safe." You too, I said, worrying for her for the first time since we met. I had to push those thoughts away. She was an adult and a warrior, with far more experience than I had. Oh, one more thing, I said, handing her one of the small storage rings with my improvised bomb inside. Toss the slave collar and say the word Hika, it should activate the runes. Just don't wait too long, they aren't exactly stable. She nodded, placing the ring on her opposite hand. The fact that it was her ring finger wasn't lost on me. I chuckled internally as she gave me a knowing smile. I guess we were engaged now, I thought ruefully. We split up halfway to the bazaar and would approach the building from opposite ends of the same block. This way we could try to pull as many enemies as possible to us while remaining relatively close. I took a deep breath, readying myself for what came next. I rushed from behind the building and towards the blockade. I was spotted almost immediately after leaving my cover. It seemed most of the hostiles were watching for anyone approaching the bazaar. I didn't use any skill to close the range faster, I needed to know something. A few magic spells flew my way but either petered out due to range or missed me because the person's accuracy was garbage. I didn't see the Chaos Mage here, which made me nervous. I could only hope she had already left for Chicago. As I got closer, the spells became more accurate and I had to duck and dodge. I must have pulled nearly a dozen attackers. Too bad they were mostly slaves, there would be no pulling punches here. I pulled out the modified collar and whipped it like a frisbee. Although it didn't catch the air nearly as well, my enhanced strength and agility made up for it. The disc sailed right for a group of 4. They were smart enough to avoid getting directly hit with the collar, but I activated it as soon as it passed by the front 2. There was a loud whump sound as the item exploded, showering those clothes with bits of hot metal. Striker takes 153 damage. Frost Mage takes 184 damage. Duelist takes 110 damage. Temporal Archer takes 105 damage. The 4 I damaged had classes that were easy enough to figure out, except the archer. Was it the spiritual meaning of the word or the time related? I guess I would find out as he launched a silver arrow at me. I was going to smack it away with my staff but thought better of it, instead ducking below the shot. I heard a ghostly howl as the arrow flew by my head. I pulled out some more slave collars, whipping them at the other groups, causing them to scatter. These weren't modified but they didn't know that as they instinctively dodged away from the possible explosion. This bought me time to close in on the first group. The archer was up and about but the other 3 were in bad shape. Still trying to recover from my initial attack. I didn't want to waste my blink step just yet. Just a few more feet, I thought, dodging another ghostly arrow just barely. I cast Earth Fist on the archer, throwing off his aim on his next attack. These people must think I was nuts or something. Running in to engage 12 people at once. And they would be right, this was fucking nuts but my blood was pumping and my adrenaline was spiking. This was a battle high and every time I experienced it I wanted more. I used multicast to reset the cooldown of Earth Fist, then used that to launch myself into the air. I spun my staff while casting Seismic Strike, smashing the end of my staff down on the ground as I landed. Another theory of mine was proven correct. The waves rippled out much stronger than normal from my impact point. I had wondered for a while if additional force could add more damage to spells as it did with normal attacks. If you paid attention the system would clue you into some of these eccentricities. All 12 individuals were close enough to be hit by the effect, knocking them all to the ground. While it wasn't a significant amount more damage, it helped. I took advantage of my enemy's weakened state to whip a stunning gust at the mage, figuring she was the closest to death. With my air attribute imbuement still active the attack was a vicious slash of concentrated air that nearly cleaved the woman in half. The elemental affinity enhancing the attack. I had no time to dwell on this, I changed target to the next individual. Fiona followed Paul's instructions, throwing the collar and injuring 5 enemies with the resulting explosion. Unlike Paul, she couldn't fight against large groups of people at the same time. So she reflected every magical attack she could, backing between 2 buildings to limit the number of enemies that could come at her at a time. The Dark Guardian tried to slash at me as I engaged with the duelist. A convenient bullet struck him in the shoulder knocking his attack off course. Instead of losing my head I only received a small cut. These 2 attackers were far more troublesome than almost anyone else I fought. The exception being Charla. I made a mental reminder to thank Wellman for the assist. All my effort was in keeping the damn duelist's blades from slicing me up. He was fast, I suspected it was either a skill or someone had buffed him. I took a few more shallow cuts as I backed away, trying my best to keep the other enemies in front of me. I wanted to pace myself and save my trump card for Charla if she showed up but I was fighting a losing battle. I used Rejuvenate to heal my cuts. It wasn't quite time, I needed to drag out this fight a little longer. Even now I could see a few more people starting to run towards us to get in on the action. I guess I should feel honored that they thought so highly of my skills. The striker tried to leap in to attack me while my concentration was on the duelist but I saw him coming, smashing him in the groin with Earth Fist. The awful scream drew all the male attackers' attention. There is just something so horribly wrong about attacking someone like that. Even I could feel my boys shrink up in discomfort. Despite my discomfort, I capitalized on the second of inattention, striking out with flurry against the duelist. I had to give the man props for his skills, he still deflected 10 of the 12 strikes. Unfortunately, for him the ones he missed cut his belly and throat wide open. The archer also capitalized on my attack, hitting me in the side with one of his arrows. I stumbled back, the pain was excruciating. You have been inflicted with weakness, -1 endurance for 1 hour. I pulled the offending arrow out with a pained grunt, casting Healing Touch. I tried casting Cleanse but it failed to remove the debuff. I needed to take this archer out of the fight, he was smart enough to take advantage of any opening I gave him. To do that though I would need to use Blink Step as he was well outside my melee range. He also just so happened to be one of the few Black Dragon members attacking me, the other was already dead. I glanced at my mana, seeing I was at just over 120. I ducked the next arrow and pulled a mana vial, downing it before someone could stop me. I now had enough mana to work with, I pulled the Black Dragon armband out. Run, away! I shouted. The slaves all bolted. Before the archer could intercede I cast Blink Step, rushing at him. The man managed to get another arrow off, hitting me in the leg. He was forced to drop his bow and pull out a short sword to defend himself. I slapped the blade away, using my momentum to shove the blunt end of my staff into the man's throat. There was a sickening crack as his windpipe gave way. I followed this blow up with a stab through his back, right into his lung. The man choked to death on the ground, not being able to recall the slaves that ran off. I kind of felt sorry for them because they would probably keep running until they died or another member stopped them. I didn't have time to concern myself with their fate. 6 more individuals approached, all wearing armbands. I could see even more coming behind those. Before I could lose hope, my watch let out a single beep letting me know it was time. Flashes of light appeared from the bazaar as hundreds, no thousands of people appeared. Even soldiers from the missing command poured out, all ready to fight. The 6 nearest me witnessed the enemies pouring from the building, apparently thinking they had enough time to take me. I decided to disabuse them of that notion. Not having to hold back now, I chugged another mana potion. Dropping the empty vial to the ground, smiling as they rushed me. Since no spells were cast, I assumed they were all melee fighters. Before the first one reached me, I cast Area of Denial. His glowing purple axe impacted my barrier, bouncing off. I decided to see who I was up against. Viking Pillager level 11. Amazon level 10. Skinwalker level 11. Mercenary level 9. Hunter/Rogue level 7. Martial Artist level 8. There were quite a few big hitters and some unique classes. Although, I had to wonder why the dual classer didn't just take a ranger class instead. Oh well, that was his issue to deal with. Before the lot could come up with a plan, I struck, using Seismic Strike, quickly following it up with Flurry against the pillager. He died from the wounds before any of his buddies could help. The Amazon was the first to recover from my spell. She slammed her spiked mace down on my shield to no effect. I flicked my staff out, imbued with Aura Strike. It only cut a shallow gash on her arm, but it was enough for the spell effects to take hold, slowing her down. I dashed in, taking advantage of her weakened state to land 3 more slashes. I followed this up with an earth fist to her back as she tried to escape my assault. I had aimed for just below her ribs, but she slipped, causing the attack to hit higher, breaking 3 of her ribs. It would be enough to keep her out of the immediate fight. I turned to the Skinwalker. He was using massive bear claw hands to try and rend my dome apart. I jabbed my staff towards his eye. He jumped back, avoiding the staff, but not the last-second stunning gust I cast silently. The man was surprised by my attack, the blade of air carving out his right eye. He had turned his head just enough to avoid a lethal blow. The spell effect activated, causing the man to fall to the ground, immobile. That left 3 on 1 and my barrier was down in another 10 seconds. I wasn't sure I could take on the last 3. Not with my mana this low. I was also out of items to refill my mana quickly. I decided to make the best of it, running at the hunter. I jabbed and slashed at him, keeping him off balance as I bumped him with my shield. Eventually, I got a few good hits in, taking him out of the fight just as my shield dropped. I stepped back as the martial artist overcorrected, trying to hit my now non-existent shield. I kicked my staff's blunt end out, smashing him in the jaw as he toppled forward. He was quick though, managing to spin out of my reach and get to his feet. Blood dripped from his jaw, but he was quick to recover. The injury barely seemed to affect him. The mercenary tried to close in on me with his dagger. Every time he got close, I whipped my staff at him, forcing him to dodge back. The martial artist, on the other hand, fought as a man possessed. Kicking and punching at me like a demon, his appendages leaving a faint brown afterglow. Neither of these two had the speed on me, but they did have more strength. I was forced to dodge blows instead of blocking them. Each block left my hands numb from the effort. The martial artist landed a roundhouse kick to my side, knocking me to the ground. I grunted from the impact. "Uff, someone ate their Wheaties today," I said through blood-flecked lips. "You are a poor fighter," the martial artist said, "only your class skills have brought you this far," he added, approaching to finish me off. "Joke's on you," I said, pulling out 6 collars. His eyes went wide as I threw the collars at him. He dove to the ground, covering his head. "2 for flinching," I said, hitting him in the back with a stunning gust, leaving a large cut across his spine. He tried to get up, the spell effect not activating its stun, but my attack left his lower body paralyzed. At least until the system healed him. I turned my focus to the mercenary who surveyed the scene, and the battle behind him. He looked at me, then pulled the armband off. "They don't pay me enough for this bullshit," he said, running off. I went around finishing off the rest of the Black Dragon members near me. Starting with the Skinwalker since he was the least injured. Then the Amazon, followed by the hunter. I then kneeled next to the martial artist. Skill is good and all, but I prefer to be unpredictable, I said, stabbing him through the heart. As I got up I looked at the battle, or what was left of it. It looked like the Black Dragon forces had been routed, but it had come at a high cost to the military and civilians. I couldn't see Fiona, but I knew she was still alive as her icon was still active in my display. I took the time to look at my messages. The battle was essentially over. You have reached level 12, modifiers increased by 1, 2 free skill slots available. Penetrate, decreases target armor by 3 for 4 SEC, cost 15 mana, cooldown 10 SEC. Banshee's Wail, a focused shockwave of sound emanates from your mouth, stunning all those within a 10 cone in front of you for 5s and reduces wisdom by 1 for an hour to all those affected. Cost 40 mana, cooldown 1 minute. Penetrate was a bit of a letdown, so I skipped that ability. Banshee's Wail, however, gave me another nice ranged ability. So I picked that up, deciding to hold off on picking my other skill. It wasn't like I was lacking skills to use. In fact, it was getting harder to utilize all of them. I decided to look at my full stats since it had been so long. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter level 12. Strength, 12, plus 2, modifier x13. Endurance, 16 modifier x31. Agility, 15, plus 2, modifier x13. Perception, 15 modifier x13. Intelligence, 19 modifier x31. Wisdom, 14 modifier x13. Charisma, 11 modifier x13. Luck, 14 modifier x13. HP, 496, 545. Mana, 589. Mana Regen, min 182. Skills. Rejuvenate, Minor Wind Walk, Minor Giant Strength Plus, Enhanced Shield, Area of Denial, Healing Touch, Improved Earth Fist, Aura Strike, Endure, Rock Skin, Cleanse, Flurry of Blows, Seismic Strike, Stunning Gust, Second Chance, Impact, Blink Step, Multicast, Godly Might, Eye of the Storm, Imbue, Banshee's Wail. I decided to collapse on the sidewalk, my energy spent. About a minute later I felt a hand on my shoulder. Looking up I saw Fiona. She looked almost as haggard as I felt. How did it go? I asked. I survived, she said in response. We should go collect Specialist Wellman. I had completely forgotten about the man in the heat of battle. I held out my hand and Fiona helped me up off the sidewalk. About 2/3 of my mana had recovered by this point, but I still felt bone weary. We made our way over to the building, hoping the man would meet us at the entry, but he wasn't there. With his skills he was probably keeping an eye on the fleeing enemy, so we climbed to the 5th floor to retrieve him. What the hell, Wellman, the least you could do is meet us downstairs, I said, entering the apartment. My eyes were blinded as a searing bolt of electricity struck me. I went down in a heap, unable to so much as move as the energy locked up my body. Fear flooded my brain. I knew who had attacked. There were sounds of fighting, so I had some hope that I could get out of this alive. That was quickly dashed. I heard Fiona scream and fall to her knees. SST stop, I managed to stutter out. Oh, our prey decides he wants to talk. Very well, Charla said in her sickly sweet voice. SP spare her PL please. Oh, you want us to spare your lover? Very well, I will make you a deal, she said, tossing a unique slave collar at my prone form. If you put this collar on willingly, I won't kill your woman. I will even make this a binding oath in the system. I managed to lever my head up to look at Fiona. She was on her knees, the duelist standing behind her, resting his blades on either side of her neck. This was the same man that seemed to follow the Chaos Mage everywhere she went. I checked his status, seeing that he was now level 16. Fiona looked at me, pleading me not to put the collar on with her eyes. I couldn't let her die though. I cared for her more than I wanted to admit. So I reached out with my still shaking hands and snapped the device around my neck. I could feel the magic take hold. I also felt the system enforcing Charla's contract. There, that wasn't so bad, was it? She said smiling, don't move a muscle. She nodded once to the duelist and his blade sliced Fiona's head clean off. I tried to scream, to rage, to look away, to do anything, but her command was absolute. Watch her life ebb away and don't move or make a sound, Charla said, her voice turning vindictive. She didn't even break her oath, as she wasn't the one to kill Fiona. The worst part was the message. Fiona has died, second chance activated. Fiona's eyes popped back open on her severed head. Her lips making sucking motions as she blinked rapidly, trying futilely to accomplish something that just wasn't possible. My vision too blurry with tears to even see her face clearly as she died a second and final time. Her icon graying out to notify me that she was gone, it matched the grayed out icon for Wellman. They had slain him as well. It felt like someone had ripped out a chunk of me, leaving a bottomless void. The only thing I had to fill that space was rage, cold, hard, and impotent. I had no outlet for this emotion, the collar preventing me from harming either of these two. Get up, slave, we have places to be, Charla said, laughing merrily as we left the building. Chapter 37, Rock Bottom. I stumbled and fell, my exhaustion too much. The beating followed shortly after. I didn't even have the energy to try and protect myself as I was beaten and whipped with a stick. I wasn't the only slave to fall over in our fast march south. What did they expect? We must have marched 40 miles. Did they somehow expect people on foot to have the same amount of energy that the Black Dragon members, all on horseback, had? It was ludicrous. I levered myself off the ground, the beating had subsided and my collar was causing me more and more pain as I failed to follow my orders. The rest period was over and we trudged onward. I almost fell again as my foot caught another root. I didn't know how much longer I could go on for. My body had been tired even before I was captured. My mind kept going back to the apartment and Fiona's severed head, staring at me accusingly. After the battle the Black Dragons had all come together, abandoning the city without a second thought. They didn't seem to care in the least that over 50 of their members fell in that battle along with hundreds of slaves. Originally they set out towards the west before turning to the south. I don't know if it was because they were afraid of pursuit or just to throw people off the trail. I doubted the survivors of the Fox Valley had it in them to pursue a force of this strength so soon after the battle. The caravan continued on while I was lost in my thought. I wondered why no one searched my gear when I was captured. I guess it didn't matter to them, they had nothing to fear from me. The collars prevented any of the slaves from stepping out of line or harming themselves. I'm sure if they wanted something of mine they would take it. Not like I could prevent it. This was one upside to me being Charla's personal slave. It afforded me a minor bit of protection from the predations of the lower ranks. The downside being I was subject to her whims, and they were mercurial. One point during the march Charla came up to gloat. She was happy to point out the fact that I put the collar on willingly. Praising me for my devotion to her, calmly telling me about my upgraded collar. How it allowed her to benefit more from my actions, with tighter control over me. This brought me to the conclusion that there was some wiggle room for orders. At least on the old versions. It would hurt but I would push the limits to see what they were. Halt, a voice rang out over the column. I was finally able to stop. The sun was getting close to setting after our prolonged march. Set up camp. I wasn't sure what to do. I just started to pull out a tent from my ring before a voice stopped me. Not, you sweetie, Charla said, approaching me on her horse. I stopped at her command. You can set up my tent, then we can have some real fun, she said, an evil grin spreading across her face. I shuddered but got to work assembling her tent. It took me a while to set it up, it wasn't a simple one-man tent but eventually, I got it up. Time to head inside, she said. God, how I wanted to just end the woman. I still had the burning rage from Fiona's murder deep inside me, waiting to be let out. It's like that saying, you don't realize how much you care for someone until they're gone. She was the first person I trusted with my life, which was weird to think about. I felt like a complete failure for letting her die. I would bide my time, my chance would come eventually. See that I am not disturbed, Charla said to her ever-present guard. She threw aside the tent flap and stepped inside. Oh, that look of hate on your face is precious, but I can't have my slaves appearing to be disobedient, now can I? So, first, we will work on adjusting your attitude. On your knees, she said, pulling out a short whip, shall we begin? It was one of the worst nights of my life. The only other night that came close was the one where my parents and sister died. That was more emotional pain than physical, but just like that night, I would endure the pain. I wouldn't let her break me. Charla was ruthless in her torture. She didn't even allow me to scream, ordering me not to open my mouth. So only muffled cries could be heard over the wet slaps of her bloody whip. She forced me to heal myself, over, and over, and over again as she beat me bloody. having witnessed my ability to heal during our fight. Eventually, she stopped, ordering me to remain still and quiet, forcing me to watch her sleep only a few feet away, while I remained on my knees all night. Despite the pain and the rage, I managed to fall asleep in that position. I woke up sore and cramped after what seemed only an hour or two of fitful slumber. The process of force marching the slaves, forcing me to set up her tent each night, and beating me senseless repeated. Eventually, I was able to mask my feelings, at least enough to make her happy. I had lost track of time, the landscape around me, and even distance during those grueling marches. Good puppet, she said, running her hand down my jawline, then slapping me hard across the face. I kept my face emotionless, knowing that if I showed any sign of pain or anger she would just beat me more to prove a point. She smiled, a knowing little evil smile. This will work, for now. Eventually, you will come to love me as I love you, my sweet pet. Tomorrow night you will be put on patrol with the rest of the slaves. I knew patrol was another form of punishment. It meant I would get little to no sleep and possibly have to fight, but at this point, it felt like winning the lottery. I replied in a monotone voice, yes, mistress. That was the name she wished me to call her. Ugh, it made me feel so dirty. She lay down and went to sleep, leaving me in my usual kneeling pose, unable to move. I let exhaustion take over as I drifted asleep. Morning came fast like it always did when I was stuck in this position. I was bleary-eyed from lack of sleep and sore from aches and pains that the system couldn't heal. Another thing the system didn't do was remove scarring quickly. Scars crisscrossed my entire body. Charla had been thorough in her ministrations. She took particular joy torturing my privates. With the system's healing you could castrate someone and it would grow back eventually. Ask me how I know? I doubted I would ever have kids or even want to procreate after the unthinkable abuse she put me through. Just remembering it made me want to cry, but I locked that emotion away with the others. I'm sure a psychologist would say what I am doing is bad for my long-term mental stability. Do you know what else is bad for that, doc? Being beaten and tortured on a daily basis, so stick your PhD where the sun doesn't shine. I thought having powers to heal would have been a godsend in this chaotic new world. Instead, my gift of healing had become a curse. Used only to prolong my suffering for Charla's enjoyment. My only condolence was that she was more fixated on teaching me a lesson, or in her words correcting my behavior, than learning about my skills. This allowed me to keep Second Chance a secret. I can't imagine how much more severely she would push her torture if she knew I could come back. I had no desire to go back into the land between death. I needed to keep her focus off me. As long as I was useful to her she shouldn't care too much. All of this abuse was just to get back at me for what I had done to her in the town to the north. She broke my arms on the fourth day, at least I think it was the fourth day. Of course, she prevented me from healing them. She said I needed to understand the pain I put others through. The woman was as vindictive as they came. It had taken a full day for my arms to heal themselves through the slow system healing. She probably would have broken my legs as well, if it wasn't for the fact I needed them to walk. Charla got an almost sexual amount of joy from finally capturing the man who injured her so soon after the system came online. She even got the bonus of watching her escaped slave die. She didn't particularly care how the collar got removed from her slave. Only that there was no point putting a new one on her. After they captured the town, she had confronted the merchant that sold the collars to them. She discovered, through judicial use of pain, some flaws in the design of the collars. The basic ones weren't as immutable as they had been led to believe. Also that there was no point recapturing an escaped slave as they could not be compelled anew by the magic. So it was an easy decision to let Dominique remove her. After her chat with the merchant, she purchased the upgraded collars. Supposedly they had fixed the flaws from the previous design. Time would tell if she needed to return and end the merchant's miserable life. Unlike the old collars, these weren't yet tied to her father's skill. She would only receive experience when the slave was within 100 yards of her. She would remedy that issue when she reached Chicago though. She remembered the anger after Paul had broken her arm. She had indulged her chaotic emotions that day by slaughtering most of the pathetic people she recruited in that town. Only 3 remained and those had all come up with her from Chicago. It was enough to sate her mercurial desires. Then a gift presented itself, in the form of a spy amongst the royal guard. Victor had clued her into the time, day, and likely path that Paul would take as he went south. The man had sold out his own people for a chance to join the Black Dragons, after seeing their rapid rise in power. Of course, she had roasted him alive. She didn't need traitors in the sect and she had all the information she needed to pursue her quarry. The timing worked out well, the first summons had arrived. She needed to return to Chicago within the month. Apparently, the fighting down there was more intense than predicted. Her group tailed Paul and the lackey sent by the Royal Guard. It was only unfortunate that she had been able to fool them at the time. Lying about his death. She tortured the woman but she was stubborn and didn't give up much in the way of information. Unlike Victor, that man had sung like a bird. So she knew why the woman had been sent out. If she could hasten the fall of an outsider enclave it worked in her favor. So she collared the woman, intending to utilize her to draw out the Royal Guard's contact, eliminating any possible help they might receive. Just as everything was falling into place the woman was rescued. Escaping without anyone being the wiser. Charla was sent into a rage at the news. Killing 20 unfortunate slaves that had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She gathered up her most trusted cohorts and set off towards the bazaar. She knew the woman would have to head there eventually. She had not expected to find Paul there with her. That damn man was like a zit that kept coming back. To top it off he had somehow figured out how to remove collars. She would pull that information from him when she was ready. You never knew when it might come in handy. The two managed to kill off Bartholomew, her best assassin, along with 4 other men. At the time she had no clue how. Sure she knew that Fiona woman was a capable fighter from another world, but Paul? The man was clearly not a fighter. So when she saw them exit the building and head towards the bazaar, she managed to restrain her desire to kill him on the spot. Meanwhile capturing the scout and watching the man fight. The man was brutally effective in combat if a bit unskilled. She could tell the man had upped his game since their first encounter. She watched him take down 5 people over level 10, causing the 6th to flee from the fight. She made sure to send her newest killer after the man. Can't have deserters in the ranks. The man utilized clever tricks to overcome his stronger foes. It made her want him even more. Fate was with her. Paul and Fiona came straight back to retrieve their lost puppy. It was almost too easy to capture them. A simple lightning bolt incapacitated Paul, while Dominique fought the woman to submission. Charla pushed an ice spear through the other captured man's heart. Then gave Paul the ultimatum. It was simple. She could clearly see the bond between the two, hell she could practically smell the sex on them. She wanted those feeling for herself. He accepted and the rest was history. Of course, her forces had to flee the area right after. Heading west before turning to the south. That was always the plan. She knew her force couldn't hold the town indefinitely. It was more of a test for her forces, those who survived would be stronger for it, those who died were not up to the Black Dragon standards. It didn't much matter, she would be back in due time to claim the town. When the council was done with their idiotic war for Chicago. She didn't know why the council was so invested in controlling that area. Sure there was an entry point to the bazaar near it, but who cares, there were plenty of those. The council was a bunch of fools, dangerous fools, but still fools. So focused on strength and a short-sighted plan to take over Chicago, that they didn't plan towards the distant future. She wasn't surprised, they were the typical leaders of industry. Corporate types, that always thought of the bottom line, and immediate profits or ways to acquire power. They didn't care what happened 5 or 10 years down the road. The only difference now was power was the commodity for them. Her father had been the one to propose the plan to them. It was his small geological company that discovered one of the system interface nodes. At the time he needed money to completely unearth the node. He didn't want the government to get wind of his find. So he started to put a plan in place that eventually led him to the council. They were a group of shady investors, with ties to all sorts of illegal activities, and were perfect for her father's intentions. Of course, other parties caught wind of the discovery, years later. It was inevitable that some other nodes were discovered, scattered throughout the world as they were. This didn't matter, her father was a genius. Having planned out contingencies for this very possibility long in advance. Along with a roadmap to make the Black Dragon a global superpower, dwarfing any country that existed to this date and enduring long past his death. But he had to deal with the council and their pandering. It slowed progress towards the activation of the plan by decades. Allowing some other entity to steal the initiative from them. It had been a setback. However, her father had factored in that possibility and managed to cobble together a way forward, despite the council's uselessness. It had involved less than savory methods, using slaves differently than they first intended to. Her father was not one to balk at something as simple as slavery if it meant completing his goals. Slaves had been one of the foundational methods her father had worked into the plan. The reason for this was to keep knowledge of the plan and the node to as few people as possible. Yet they needed a large force once the system went live, and slaves fit the bill nicely. That led to the collars and the armbands. Simple, inexpensive items they were able to obtain before the system activated. They found a merchant willing to accept a trade. We traded common items they had never seen before for collars. While the magic didn't work until the system went active, they were distributed among the rank and file in preparation. Her father had to choose a slightly different class to take advantage of a combination of skills that allowed the collars to provide experience from any range. His original class no longer feasible. He had long since learned every possible skill combination he might need going forward, so he was able to adjust. This had been the least desirable outcome for his plan, but it was still salvageable. Her father's ability to link any device he touched had helped feed the sect's rapid growth. It even worked on items he touched prior to the system going live. This allowed for satellite locations to start growing. Slaves weren't a problem. The sect had been kidnapping people for over a decade for any number of uses. The slaves carved out a section of the city in a bloody day of fighting. So what if most of them were lost? There were always more slaves. If her father could hear her thoughts, he would reprimand her. He always told her to treat them like indentured help, not slaves. Not that her father cared about them, just that they were less likely to turn violent if they were treated well. She did, for the most part, treating them like another bit of furniture in the room. That was until she saw the look on her newest prize's face. It set her emotions off. She beat him ragged until she was able to get her emotions under control again. It was the one downside to her advanced class. Unlike most mages, elemental or otherwise, that was relegated to a certain type of magic, she was not. She had access to any type of magic and was only restricted by her intelligence and level. It was the main reason she chose the class. The other being her father's words to pick any advanced class she could access. And not multi-class until level 20. She had followed her father's advice, knowing the man's fathomless intelligence and his care for her. She just wished she could have more of his time. Despite the downsides, her class gave several benefits. One being that she was hard to counter. It was easy to counter an elemental mage, just use the opposite element. Since most specialized in one or two elements, it wasn't hard. Charla looked at her newest pet. It was a pity she had to break the man. He was quite the specimen. His body, tenacity, cunning, and class were all quite remarkable, and she was now looking forward to their return to Chicago. She would set him loose in the war. The other pre-system groups would rue the day they tried to take on the Black Dragons. The slave masters went easy on us today, only pushing us 25 miles. I think it had more to do with the large river, cutting from east to west. That now barred our path south, more than any form of sympathy for the slaves. As we stopped, I saw Charla conversing with her second-in-command, the duelist. I never got the man's name, and I was unable to make any changes to my settings. Unless Charla changed her standing orders, prohibiting me from taking any new skills or changing any settings unless I begged her to let me. Fat chance of that happening, I thought, remembering I still had one open skill slot. The man walked up to me. Come with me, we are assigning you to a patrol group. I followed the man through the tents of sect members, to the outskirts of the hasty encampment. The slaves had slapped together whatever protection they could to hide from the elements. It was a good thing it was late spring and not fall or winter. We walked up to another sect member, wearing well-made leather armor and sporting a spear. There were 3 slaves beside him. The slaves looked a little too chummy with the Black Dragon member, and I instantly disliked them. Recruit, the duelist said, the other man quickly giving a salute by bumping his fist against his chest. Yes sir, what can I help you with? The man said in a no-nonsense fashion. You will take this slave into your patrol rotation and put him through his paces. Right away sir. Over here slave, the man said, motioning me over. I was forced to comply with his orders, walking over to stand with the rest of the slaves. I watched the duelist walk away, his job complete. So new guy, what's your class? One of the other slaves asked. He was a burly man with black shoulder-length hair and was even taller than I was. He reminded me of an 80s-style cartoon hero, all rippling muscles with a sword strapped across his back. I could easily picture him pulling out the sword and saying some stupid catchphrase. I ignored the man, choosing to remain quiet. I wasn't here to make friends or acquaintances. That would make it much harder to kill them when it came time to escape. Hey dude, I'm talking to you, the man said again, grabbing my shoulder. I snapped, pulling my staff from my ring and cracking him across the face as hard as I could, which was pretty hard. The man went down, holding his face in his hand. I knew I fucked up, but the rage had been building for days and it finally escaped. The spike of pain from the collar caused me to fall to the ground and clutch my neck. Before the other three joined the fight, I heard a shout. Stand down, the team leader said, stomping over towards me. You four will get along or I will throw you to the monsters and see how you fare. Do I make myself clear? A chorus of yes, master, came from the group. I picked myself off the ground, the pain from the collar finally fading away. I guess that answers the question I had about attacking other slaves. Not fatal, but not pleasant. The man eyed me and my staff. You know, my brother was killed by a man wielding a staff, he said, no hint of emotion in his voice. That man wouldn't happen to be you now, would it? I could only shrug, not knowing this man's name or his brother's, and honestly, I didn't care. Then the man's gaze turned towards my ring. That's a mighty fine item you got there. Did your master give it to you? No, I answered in the flat tone I had mastered due to Charla's ministrations. Good, then you can give it to me. For some reason, this command had no effect on me and for a second I was baffled. Suddenly I remembered Charla saying she owned everything about me. I guess this included my items as well. I guess that was a small miracle. I just stood there not answering the man. When he grew angry and tried to rip the ring off my hand, I dodged back out of his reach. Don't move, he ordered, that ring is mine. This ring belongs to my master, I replied, you can take up ownership of it with Miss Cotton if you wish. That was enough to halt the man in his tracks. He wasn't stupid, but I could see a glint in his eye. This wasn't over. He turned and kicked the big oaf still on the ground. Get up, it's time for us to go. The four of us headed off on patrol. I decided to see if I could use Identify on the group. William Conrad, disciple of the Crescent Moon, level 8. William was a man of middling height, topping off at 5 feet 8 inches with slicked-backed black shoulder-length hair. He really didn't have any other defining features about him, being rather plain-looking. As for his class, I had no idea what it meant, but I assumed it was a style of spear combat. Gus Frey, Blood Oath Barbarian, level 7. This was the name of the man I knocked on his ass, and what was with these classes? They sure didn't seem like normal classes. Vivian Branch Dalmar, Temptress, level 7. Rufus Branch Dalmar, Protector, level 8. Husband and wife at least they got to stay in the same group. The wife would have been a beauty in her earlier years. Auburn hair and wavy locks past her shoulder, and a curvy but not plump figure. It appeared she didn't change any of her physical attributes when the system went live because she looked to be in her 50s. A bit of grey hair streaking through her locks, and wrinkles on her face. Or maybe that was just her preference. Who was I to judge? I looked to be in my mid-20s despite my real age being over 35. The husband was a pudgy man that seemed to glare daggers at any man that so much as gave his wife side-eye. He had a head of mostly grey hair and a once neatly trimmed beard, that had seen better days. Needless to say, I was getting the cold shoulder from all four of them. I sighed internally, knowing this was going to be a long day. All right, new guy, what's your name? Conrad said. Paul, I replied. Well, Paul, Conrad said, emphasizing my name, perhaps a demonstration of your abilities, you know, so we can see how effective you are in a fight, he added with a smile. This was going to suck. I couldn't cause harm to anyone with the armband, and with the way he was looking at me, it meant he was going to duel me himself. I was proven correct a few seconds later as a prompt appeared in my vision. William Conrad would like to challenge you to a duel. This is a non-lethal duel and combat will end when one combatant reaches 10% health. All health and mana is restored after the match ends. Before I could reject the request, I heard Conrad say, "You will accept, Paul." The command took effect, forcing me to accept the duel. I was just glad it was a non-lethal duel. Perhaps the man was smarter than I gave him credit for and knew better than to anger Charla. It didn't mean he wouldn't take it out on me if he could though. Now, Paul, let's see what you got. The man came at me with no more warning, a quick jab to my side leaving a shallow wound before I dodged out of the way. My armor was in my storage ring, so I had to be more careful. It was pretty much a useless mess at the moment anyway. All the fighting I endured before being captured had left it in tatters. I had planned to upgrade, seeing as how the chitin plates weren't cutting it anymore. Of course, this was before I got captured. Focusing back on the battle, I realized all of my buffs were down. I decided to change that. Even if I couldn't harm the man, at least I could prolong the fight a little bit, while preparing myself for later. I managed to enable all of my buffs while I slapped most of William's strikes aside with my staff. The man was playing with me a bit. I caught a glance at the group's faces while we circled each other. They wore surprised expressions at the number of buffs I cast on myself. Sometimes it even surprised me. I watched my mana pool drain down to 189 as I cast all of them. I needed another 4 seconds to cast my last buff, Second Chance. I figured it could wait since this was a non-lethal bout, but I wouldn't waste the chance to freely cast the expensive spell. While the man was skilled, I had fought more difficult opponents. I had to make the fight look increasingly hard for me. Purposefully missing some incoming attacks that drew blood, while trying to avoid the really painful attacks. The man surprised me, using an ability similar to my flurry to strike me 4 times in rapid succession. As I reeled back from the attacks, he jumped into the air, doing a 360-degree spin while bringing his spear across in a whipping motion. The blade of energy that his spear produced blew me off my feet, ending the match just as I finally cast Second Chance. "Humph, if that's all you got, you will be lucky to survive a week," William said, looking down on me. "I might as well put your skills to some use. Enhance the rest of the party, starting with me." Luckily his orders had been specific to enhancements, and Second Chance was not an enhancement. So I followed his orders to the letter, buffing the team with Minor Wind Walk, Minor Giant Strength Plus, Rock Skin, and Endure when my mana allowed it. Since he didn't ask about my other skills, I assumed he thought they were self-buffs only. "Paul, you take the point, 10 yards out should be sufficient. Try not to die," the man added with a laugh, followed by a chuckle from the other 3. "Bunch of fucking brown nosers," I thought as I moved to the front of the group to start patrolling. William had been able to hide his emotions and concerns during the fight, only allowing a small tremor in his hand to escape afterward. Luckily the slaves had been tasked to patrol and had not seen his moment of weakness. The man Paul was a beast in disguise. It had taken all of William's skills and abilities to force an end to the duel. He even got the impression that Paul was letting him win. It was true that the man couldn't harm him, but that still didn't lessen William's disquiet over the man's abilities, and those were just the combat ones he saw. Not to mention the buffs, that even he was sporting now. William looked at his status sheet, seeing the strength and agility bonus. Just what kind of monster did the Black Queen collar, he thought with a shudder. Chapter 38, Patrol. Despite the condition of my armor, I decided to wear it anyway, tying up the straps and loose bits as best as I could. I looked like a fashion model, promoting the world's most ridiculous piece of clothing. I even imagined all the oohs and ahs from the imaginary crowd around me. I got a few odd looks from the other members of the group. In hindsight, I should have been paying more attention, instead of daydreaming and fiddling with my armor. Then perhaps I might have seen the arrow streaking towards me in time to dodge, instead of taking it in the knee. I was so surprised that the pain didn't register at first. A ridiculous thought that my days of adventuring were over ran through my mind before the pain arrived. Falling over saved me from being hit by the next arrow. The arrows were being fired from quite a distance away. With my wounded knee, I was at a bit of a disadvantage. Good thing I still had my staff. I managed to lever myself up, knocking arrows aside as I hobbled to cover. I ended up taking 2 more arrows, one skimming my side, leaving a shallow cut, and the other impacting my armor but failing to penetrate. A good thing too, because it was right where my heart lay. I could hear the others rushing up to assist. Well, rushing was an optimistic term for their fast walk. They had all the time in the world to find cover and use it to close in on the attackers. Speaking of cover, I finally found some. I yanked the arrows out. I guess the one that struck me in the chest went a bit deeper than I thought, a spurt of blood coming out as I removed the arrow. I cast Rejuvenate, feeling the wounds begin to close. My anger bubbled over and I snapped, my vision going red. I never really believed the stories of people that used this as an excuse to justify their actions. I guess I couldn't call them liars now. All this built-up rage needed an outlet, and now I had a target. For their sakes, I hoped it wasn't humans. Not that it mattered, they had to die for my anger to be sated. I let out a primal scream, sprinting from my cover. I dodged the incoming arrows as I closed in. My quarry was now in sight. Orcs, at least a dozen of them. Perfect, I could get some revenge. These looked a bit different than the ones I met earlier. I used Identify as I ran towards the creatures. They continuously shot arrows my way to try and stop my mad rush. Blood Clan Orc Ranger level 9. I decided not to wait for my fellow allies, instead, I wanted to sate the beast inside my chest. My mana was full, so I did something I wanted to try for a while. I wasn't oblivious to the possible danger as I layered water and lightning damage on my staff, I just didn't care in my current state. A halo of crackling energy dripped from my staff. I ducked another arrow, casting Blink Step to close with the archers. The orcs were on a slight bluff overlooking the path. I activated Earth Fist to launch myself up the 10-foot embankment. As I landed, my staff slammed down, releasing Seismic Strike. This disrupted the orcs long enough to implement the next step. My staff turned into a blur above my head as I cast Eye of the Storm. Lightning, wind, and rain ripped around me, blocking out everything from my sight. Occasionally I would see a dark form hurtling through the maelstrom of wind and rain, but that would soon disappear, swept away by the tempest. I kept this up for a full 7 seconds until my mana ran almost dry. As the spell dissipated, I could see the destruction. The area was a complete mess of broken trees and scattered bodies. They weren't dead yet, but they were all suffering from the stunning effect of the lightning that raged through my storm. I went to each one, slamming the bladed end of my staff into vital areas. One strike was usually enough to finish them off, my spell having injured them quite a bit. I finished off the last one just as my cohorts arrived on the scene. The short brutal fight had drained my mana and stamina. I gave the group a baleful look to make them think twice about trying to capitalize on my weakness. The three took a step back. If it was out of shock or fear, I didn't much care. My rage had been sated for now. I still felt it simmering below the surface, demanding to be set free again. Gus, Vivian, and Rufus took a step back from the newest addition to their party. Gus thought the man was honestly, just terrifying. They knew he was a significantly higher level than they were. But still, who just runs into a group of 12 attackers? They had been forced to stop and bear witness to the destructive spell Paul released, grabbing hold of trees to prevent being pulled into the vortex, along with the orcs. This wasn't their first encounter with the orcs, so they knew the creatures weren't a simple pushover. Yet Paul had managed to kill all 12 in less than 30 seconds with what they assumed was one spell, not having witnessed him dispatch the injured. Initially, the group had given Paul the cold shoulder, after his less than warm welcome. Gus could understand it, the four of them, William included, had been LARPers for years before the system arrived. It was why he got to choose his advanced barbarian class. The group had thought nothing of it when their supposed friend had talked them into putting on the collars. He sold them as enhancement devices and part of his class. Of course, they were furious when they found out what they truly were. William had defended his actions, showing them what awaited otherwise. After that, they agreed it was the best option at the moment. They stuck together, eventually meeting up with the larger force of Black Dragon disciples. It was only then that they realized the situation would never change. They had all been lied to, even William, now being told there was no way to remove the collars. Luckily, through William's own merit, he managed to keep the group together. It was a surprise when a fourth slave was added to the group. Gus chose to greet the newcomer, hoping to ease his transition, but that had been a mistake. The man turned on him in a blink. The group should have realized then, the anger that stirred in the man's heart. William made the situation so much worse, acting like an ass to the man by trying to take gear. Gus understood why. Storage rings weren't cheap, and William had spent his credits outfitting the group. But that was in the past. It was easy to see the anger bubbling away in Paul. One glance at the fiery eyes was enough. It felt like the fire wanted to devour you whole, and that's why the group took a step back. For fear of being sucked into that churning oblivion of hate. Gus wanted no part of whatever violence this man was capable of, making a silent oath to stay out of his way. Little did Gus know this oath was binding and superseded all other orders. I just glared at the group, daring them to try something. I was low on mana and a ripe target after the fight. I suspected they might try to kill me outright at William's order, but instead, they took a step back. That likely meant William had given no such order. I eased my battle stance a hair, letting the tension drain from my body. If they weren't going to fight me, I could relax a bit and recover my mana. It didn't mean I trusted them though. William walked up a few seconds later, inspecting the scene. The man only raised an eyebrow. Like he had seen much worse before. I guess you're good for something, the man said dismissively as he searched the bodies. I saw him pocket a storage ring. Looks like the man finally got what he was after. In a surprise move, we all got some credits, about 150 each. I guess he had his party set to share credits. It helped explain why the others seemed to like him so much. I doubt most slave masters did things this way. We continued our patrol, running into two other groups of orcs. This area appeared to be their hunting grounds, or we were close to a settlement. Unlike the first group, these other two groups consisted of a mixed bag of hunters and bowmen. They were also lower leveled, more in line with the ones I ran into farther north. Since my rage was bottled at the moment, I just decided to go spell less, practicing my martial forms while I carved through my targets. It was therapeutic, the ebb and flow of battle, and I lost myself to it. Finally, I was able to feel something other than rage and pain in days. I was broken out of the joy of combat when William issued an order. It would have ended soon anyway, the last orc falling to the husband and wife. All right, we went far enough out on patrol today, time to head back to camp. I had to resist the urge to try and strangle the man as my rage flooded back in to fill the void. I managed to bottle the emotion before I did something stupid. Instead, I marched back to the campsite and my mistress. Each step closer made me feel like someone was piling weights on my back. I could only hope she was in a good mood. William had fallen back with his three friends, Paul oblivious to anything around him as he plodded on back to camp. "So, what are your three's take on our new addition?" William asked. Vivian, the first to respond, said, "Fucking terrifying." The other two nodded. Rufus added his opinion, "It feels like the man would cut us down in an instant if given an opportunity." Just what did he suffer before they collared him? I don't know, and I'm not going to ask. You did hear who he said his master was? Yes. Some woman named Cotton. Vivian replied. William almost choked at this. Some woman, oh my god, careful where you say that. This woman is the one in command of this force. They just looked back at him in horror, then looked at Paul's back. Now, I could try to get him reassigned, but I have a feeling that's not going to fly with the upper brass. So despite our misgivings, yes, I have them too, we are going to have to learn to get along with this man. Just his buffs alone are worth the effort. And who knows, maybe the man will get himself killed and we can wash our hands of the whole thing, William said, ending the conversation by ordering the three ahead to keep an eye out. Paul wasn't, as he seemed to be lost in his own world. William knew if he let the man die needlessly, a ton of shit would roll down on top of him. He was a crafty piece of shit, managing to trick his three best friends into being slaves, but he wasn't without caution. All good things came to those who wait. The group arrived back in camp without any more encounters. William ordered me to return to my mistress and rejoin his group at sunup for advanced scouting. A way had been found to cross the river and we would be breaking camp and heading out tomorrow. I followed my orders, returning to Charla. "Gah, you're hideous, you can't expect to represent me properly wearing those rags. Go, find the quartermaster, and get issued some armor. Also, wash up, you smell foul." "Yes, mistress," I said, turning to head out of the tent. It had been the best outcome I could have hoped for. While she wasn't exactly in a good mood, at least she wasn't angry at the moment. I hadn't met the quartermaster in person, but I had seen him a few times. It was enough. I wandered around a few minutes until I located the large tent labeled supply. I pulled back the flap and headed inside. "Yes," a skinny man with flinty eyes said, closing a book he had been reading. "My mistress sent me here to get new armor." The man glanced at my tattered armor. "We don't have much. I have another leather jerkin. If you're handy at all, I have some metal to reinforce it," he added, pointing to a bucket of metal scrap strips too small to use on a decent armor. Next to it was a bucket of rivets. This did give me an idea, and I swept both buckets and a hammer into my ring. The man said nothing. He knew who my mistress was, even if I was just a lowly slave. He handed me a basic leather jerkin, just like the first one I purchased from Frotsar. Looking around, I grabbed a needle, some thread, along with cloth. Of course, the only color cloth and thread they had was black. I wasn't an expert at sewing. I had learned just enough over the years to get by, patching some worn clothing. I was a thrifty spender back before the system, preferring to fix clothing rather than buying new stuff. I wandered out of the tent, the quartermaster not questioning my choices, and headed off to take a bath. Charla had not given me an order or time to return, so I was going to make the most of my freedom. The bath in the river was cold but refreshing. Plenty of other people were taking advantage of the water to clean themselves. After my bath, I went to find a quiet area. I found what I was looking for between two tents. After I piled up some crates, I had a nice hidden work area. I didn't expect my rune crafting to stay secret forever, but I still preferred secrecy if I could find it. It had been some time since I had the chance to work on rune crafting. Thinking back on it brought up the memory of Fiona and me at my house. It hurt to think back on a happy memory. I squashed the feelings down as a tear slipped from my eye. I couldn't afford weakness right now. Instead, I dove into carving runic patterns on the tiny metal plates, making sure to leave the area for rivets clear. I finished the first small piece. It looked like a piece of Celtic or Norse jewelry, surrounded by the familiar knot design. For this specific design, I choose the Trinity knot, without the additional ring in the design. It felt right adding the design to my carving. I wasn't sure if it added anything to the strength of the runes. I could verify if the design worked and test some other options later. I decided on 3 runic symbols to use on the plates, the symbols for protection, strength, and power. Instead of drawing the Trinity knot and filling it with the symbols, they repeated making the pattern of the Trinity knot. I knew there were more advanced knot designs, but this seemed fitting. I used Identify on the piece of metal, seeing that it was indeed successful. Now I just needed to do it another 50 times or so and put it all together. Rune crafted leather brigandine. Quality, average. Armor, 18. Slashing resistance, 40%. Stabbing resistance, 40%. Magic resistance 15%. This metal reinforced leather brigandine was crafted by a novice crafter with subpar materials. Each plate was painstakingly rune crafted to improve the protection of the armor. Despite all the metal, this piece was still lighter than my old armor, making it easier to move in. It was also covered in a layer of black fabric, held on with the same rivets used to hold the metal plates. I used a bit of ink I had from my carving kit to black out the rivets a little to keep them from standing out so much. Congratulations for crafting your first set of average quality armor, you receive 1000 XP. After seeing the notification, I lifted the piece up, looking it over. It wasn't bad for my third attempt at armor. I needed to get a book on armor designs to see if I could improve my skills. I slipped the leather on. The metal plates were sandwiched between the leather and the outer layer of fabric, making it look like I was wearing padded armor. It felt okay, better than my old armor for sure. It also didn't clank quietly every time I moved, so that was a plus. I looked up to see that it was almost dusk. I cursed, quickly putting the armor on and heading back to the tent. I arrived in a few minutes heading inside. I was in luck, Charla wasn't in the tent. I went to my bedroll and sat cross-legged until she returned. I knew better than to fall asleep without her allowing permission. Charla entered a few minutes later, looking a bit miffed. I needed to be careful not to stir her ire. She looked at me sitting quietly, then at my armor. Shit, in my haste to return I forgot to remove the armor. Come here, she said, eyebrow raised. Hopefully, she would just think I was good at sewing. I did as commanded, rising to approach her. When I got close I stood perfectly still, my face neutral. She ran her hand over the armor, feeling the plates underneath. Then she gripped the leather, sliding her hand up behind it and against my body. I forced down a shudder at her touch. I didn't know we had armor this nice. Has the quartermaster been holding out on us? She said to herself. Take it off and let me get a better look at it. I complied with her command, unbuckling the straps and holding it out for her to inspect. It's a bit rough. I think you can do better on your next attempt. I can't have you making shoddy armor for me, she said, finishing her inspection. Good, maybe if they thought I was an apprentice armorer they wouldn't dig deeper into my other crafting. Yes, mistress, I said in rote reply. Anyway, off to sleep, we have a big day tomorrow, she said, waving me to my bed. Relief flooded my body after I heard these words. I made sure to keep any emotion from my face. I didn't want to give her another reason to discipline me. Chapter 39, A Long Road Ahead. I awoke in a cold sweat. My sleep was plagued by nightmares about Fiona and her disembodied head, pleading for me to save her. The arms on her headless body reaching for me, all the while Charla held me in an iron grip and laughed maniacally. Turning my head I could see it was near dawn, the inside of the tent barely visible in the early morning light, filtering through the canvas sides. I decided it would be preferable to head out to meet my patrol group early, rather than spending more time in the tent with Charla. I quietly stood up and made my way out of the tent. Luck was with me as I slipped out without waking the woman. Time would tell if this angered her or not. I headed through the camp towards the gathering point. I was rather early as very few people were awake, except for a couple of guard groups patrolling the perimeter. I found a quiet out-of-the-way spot to wait. Since nobody was around, I decided to carve out a quick piece of metal, using the same set of runes I used last night but without using the knot design. I felt pretty confident that nobody would give my carving a second glance. Just a slave enjoying their free time. I wanted to see if my intuition had been correct. There were a few other theories I wanted to test if I had time. The carving took only a few minutes, being just the 3 simple runic characters. When I inspected it, I got my answer. My intuition the night before had been correct. It wasn't a huge improvement over what I held now, but when all the pieces added up, it made for about 2 more armor, and 5% resistance more than what I would have gotten without using the design. I pulled out another piece of scrap metal, carving the 3 symbols again, only this time making them as small as possible. There was no change, so I filled the entire side with the tiny runes and checked again. Again there was no change. So, the size of the runes doesn't matter, and repeating the runes has no noticeable effect on potency. At least in this format. The last thing I wanted to try was the Trinity knot, but make it larger using more runes. I had to dig through the bucket of scraps to find a suitable piece of metal. Eventually, managing to find a piece about a foot long. It had been too long to use in my armor, so I had ignored it until now. I traced out the patterns that the runes would follow, making the tracing as large as possible without deforming the shape. I didn't know if that would affect the outcome, but I wanted to rule it out for now. I ended up with a design about the size of my hand. Looking around, I saw that a few people were starting to walk by as the camp was coming to life. I figured I had about an hour before we moved out and got to work. I was cramped and my hands were sore from the delicate work, but it had been completed. The piece of scrap metal sported an intricate repeating pattern of runes. I inspected the piece to see the result. It was better than the initial piece I had used in my armor, but not by as much as I had hoped. Only about a third as much. This only brought up more questions for me. Was it due to the size, or the density of the runes? Was it better to make smaller runic knots or large intricate ones? I wish I had time to experiment some more, but the camp was awake now and I could see tents starting to come down. It would only be a matter of minutes until my teammates arrived. I sighed, putting away my tools and donning my new armor. I didn't have a mirror, but the passing looks I got from slaves and Black Dragon members told me enough. The look on the slaves' faces yelled "sell out," while the Black Dragons admired my new look. Whatever, if it kept the slaves from trying to be friendly with me, so much the better, I thought, not wanting to get to know people I might have to kill later. I didn't have to wait long for the other 4 to arrive. They were as friendly as the day before with their captor, and my pit of anger boiled a bit higher. I tamped down on my emotions, shoving the rage back in the box. If survival meant working with these 4, I would try my best. All I could manage today was a curt nod. I got a few surprised looks in return. "Sweet new armor, Paul, your mistress must appreciate your contribution," William said, eyeballing my armor. I didn't bother correcting his assumption or comment on his covetous look. "Anyway, let's get moving, we need to find the best way south for the caravan." We headed along the river, towards the east for about 2 miles before we found the supposed crossing. The river cut through a rocky section of the ground, leaving a path across. It wasn't suitable to cross with any wagons or mounts as it was, but with some work, it might be doable. That work was left to a few other groups of slaves that followed us. The new groups of slaves set about cutting and splitting wood. They had skills and classes designed to ease the process along. We only stuck around for a couple of minutes while William wrote something in a book. Once he was done, we made our way across the stony section of the river. This area was quite odd, not like any boulder patch I had ever seen. It was like something had taken massive slices out of the rocks, cutting deep furrows to allow the water to flow between them, instead of over the boulders. Looking down, I couldn't see the bottom of the river despite the calm surface. It was a bit unnerving, to be honest. I decided to name this feature Dragon's Rend, thinking it was quite the fitting name. You have earned 500 XP for naming an unknown landmark. Well, how about that? Nobody thought to name the place. This also made me wonder why naming anything got me experience. It wasn't like I said the name out loud or had a map that updated with the names unless there was a skill or item that did. I may have to look into the possibility when I got free. Alright, hold up a minute. I need to report our crossing and which direction we are taking, William said, pulling out the small leather-bound book again. Linked communication device. I thought, staring at the small item. My prolonged attention was enough to activate Identify, which was odd since it didn't usually work on items owned by others that were still alive. Bound book, this item allows 2 synced copies to communicate over a 5-mile distance. I wonder if the nature of the item being bound had something to do with my ability to identify it. A question for another time, I thought, surveying this side of the river. The immediate area around the river was covered with small stones and a few scattered boulders. Beyond that was a dense thicket of trees, the likes of which I had never seen before. They had large bulbous tops that reminded me of palm trees, only these sported hanging fronds like those of a willow tree. They reminded me of angsty teens, with a slightly hunched posture and hair covering their faces. I decided to walk up to one while Williams was reporting in. The bark was oily looking but otherwise surprisingly smooth and blemish-free, unlike most bark. It did have bends every foot or so running up the length of the trunk. On closer inspection, this was where the oil seemed to be seeping from. I tried using inspect but got nothing. My skill didn't afford me the option to identify flora yet. It might be interesting to get a sample of the sap but I had nothing to store it in. I also didn't want to touch it, not knowing what sort of properties an alien tree might have. I turned to head back towards the group when something within the low bushes of the forest caught my eye. I stopped to try and determine what I saw, a small glint I thought. I waited but nothing else appeared to catch the light so I walked back to the group. Clara held her breath, she had been watching the interlopers for a few minutes now. Ever since one of the kin had spotted them the previous day a watcher had been present. So far the kin had been able to maintain their secrecy in the homeland since being transported to this strange new planet. They had been part of the system since ages long past but preferred to remain outside of the affairs of others. Clara was more curious than many of her people. So when the one that oozed a mild aura of anger approached the woodline she jumped at the chance to get a closer look. At first, she thought the foolish creature was going to touch the Silyuk tree, she almost gasped in alarm. The oil was highly toxic to anything in the forest. That was when she had almost been spotted. She had realized her mistake almost immediately, covering the offending piece of metal before the creature stopped. She waited, unmoving while the thing surveyed the area around her to see what had caught its attention. She was ready just in case it did discover her. Blowgun in hand with an oil-tipped dart. Thinking on it now she wasn't sure how effective Silyuk oil would be against the creature. She was contemplating making a run for it when the creature finally turned away and headed back towards the others, near the shore. Instead of sighing in relief, she moved to another location a little farther away, while still keeping an eye on the strangers. I got an itch on the back of my neck as I walked away from the forest. It felt like something was out there watching me. Perhaps that is what I had spotted, a buckle or piece of metal. Whatever, if it wanted to stay hidden then so be it. As long as it didn't attack us I would let it be unless ordered otherwise. All right, the report is finished, William said looking up and down the shore. He seemed to be mulling over a decision. While not ideal, I'm going to split the team into 2. One will head upstream, the other down. We need to find a less congested path through this forest, he said, waving at the dense growth of trees. This will save us time and the upper brass wants results within the hour. Paul, you're with me, the others head upstream. Use your best judgment and meet back here in 40 minutes. The other 3 acknowledged their orders and started jogging in the opposite direction. William turned to me, lead the way, he said in an O2 friendly voice. I sighed internally. So would he try to make his play, was that it? Or was he just testing me again, or perhaps hoping a strong enough creature came by and just tore me to pieces? Nothing I could do about it as I was bound by orders and the collar. For all I knew, he could order me to just stand there while a hungry chipmunk decided I would make a good meal. Death by a million bites, I thought. Although, that would be preferable to more torture under Sharla. We moved downstream and I kept my eyes forward but occasionally out of the corner of my eye I would catch the rustle of a bush or a shadow flitting between trees. Eventually, I lost track of whatever it was as the forest seemed to get even thicker if that was possible. After 10 minutes of almost flat-out running, I was slightly breathing heavier than normal. William seemed to be in about the same condition so I guessed our endurance was nearly on par. This gave me a good baseline to estimate his other attributes. With him being level 8 I knew he only had the 1 boost to stats. Unless he just so happened to go through a horde dungeon as I had, highly unlikely. I also knew his speed wasn't up to par with mine but it was close, even with my buff active. Knowing this and the fact that he had 25 points to distribute I took a guess at his stats. I figured he probably spent 3 or 4 points in strength, probably little in either intelligence or wisdom since his class didn't need the stats. Probably 4 in agility. I wasn't sure about perception, but he seemed like the type to mix perception and agility with his combat style. So let's say 5 in perception. Charisma was another one. I figured he placed a few points in, probably 5. It was the only thing that I could think of to explain how his slaves liked him so much, other than paying out credits on encounters. That would only get you so far with someone you forced into servitude. He likely had 16 endurance, being able to keep up with me. So 6 points there. That left him with 2 points to place in either luck or the other 2, assuming I was correct. Time would tell if I was way off on my assumptions or not. If I was close to being correct, he would be a far stronger fighter than I would, since I spread my points across all my stats. My advantage was with my magic and healing. I could easily outlast, maybe even outdamage him in the right circumstances. I would catalog this information along with all my other observations while being a slave. I never knew when a small piece of information would become useful. This newfound ability to store information had only been possible with my high intelligence. At first, I hadn't even noticed, but the more information I took in, the more I realized something had changed. I didn't have perfect recall, but I forgot far less and also was able to sift through data and connect seemingly disparate pieces into a whole. It wasn't that it made me smarter, just perhaps more aware of everything and how it fits together. I stopped my musing as we got back to jogging downriver. We got to an area where the river curved to the south until it ran out of sight. "This will work," William said, surveying the shoreline. It was a rather shallow and wide shoreline, easy for the caravan to move down at least for a dozen miles or so. To me, it spoke of frequent floods, but I kept those thoughts to myself. If I got lucky, maybe the entire caravan would be washed away by a flash flood. Somehow, I doubt my luck was that good, but a man could hope. "We have 10 more minutes. Let's keep going and see where it leads. When we meet up with the others, we can explore the rest. There has got to be a way around or through this forest," William said to himself. We didn't end up finding any way through in the time we had, so we headed back to the rally point. The others had also been unsuccessful as the forest started to butt up against the foothills leading to the mountain range farther west. William decided that downstream was the best option. We would have to camp along the shore again, but at least we were on the correct side of the river this time. He made his report and we ran back down the river. This area was odd, not a single sighting of monsters or other intelligent races, other than my possible encounter with one earlier. I suspected that there was something odd about this particular forest that kept most creatures at bay. Once we got to our furthest explored area, we slowed to a walk. I could hear occasional snippets of conversation among the group, but I tuned them out as I kept a wary eye on the forest and shore. Another 20 minutes went by as we walked along the shore. The forest was still as ever present as it was at the beginning of our trip, and the river was still heading in a southerly direction. It took another hour of scouting before we found a path leading away from the beach and through the foreboding woods. While not ideal to stop the caravan here, William chose to stake out the spot, letting the caravan know it was a good place to stop. He chose to leave Gus at the stake while we again split into 2 teams. The branches went down the shore and William and I headed into the forest along the grassy path. Immediately I got a different feeling about the river of grasses that surrounded us versus the forest. It wasn't a good feeling. I made sure to keep my eyes open for any possible threats. It didn't take long before I saw a section of grass rustling off to the right. William was the first to strike, dashing forward and impaling a bird-like animal. It was about hip height on me with a large sharp beak and razor-sharp claws on its legs. It didn't appear to have any wings or arms, but it did sport a short tail covered in barbs that leaked a green substance. The injured bird snapped at William and his spear with its deadly beak, all the while trying to swing its tail around to try and jab the barbs into his skin. "Keep an eye out, and warn me if you spot any more," William said as he fought with the beast. I scanned the grass, seeing 3 more wave trails heading our way. 3 more coming from the left, I said, forced to comply with his orders. "Keep them busy or deal with them until I finish here." I wasn't sure why he was having such a hard time with a single opponent until I used Identify on it. Venomous Rock Harpy level 14. It wasn't what I would picture a harpy to look like. It didn't resemble anything from Earth literature. Not really important at the moment, I thought, looking towards William. I guess that was just his luck to get an enemy 6 levels above his own to fight. Hopefully, I got luckier, I thought, readying myself. I cast Imbue on my staff, choosing wind as the element. I then whipped out a low stunning gust, bisecting the path of the 3 incoming targets. The imbued strike tore up the long grass in a 6-foot wide path. I managed to even strike the last in line, carving a bloody gash across the beast. The spell effect took hold, making it slide to the ground stunned, piled in the broken grass from my attack. The other two broke free from the tall grass, looking momentarily perplexed until they spotted me. I used Identify to see what I was dealing with. Venomous Rock Harpy level 11. Venomous Rock Harpy level 12. The lead beast let out a deafening screech and I had to drop my staff and cover my ears to prevent them from being damaged. Then the two creatures sprinted at me. I shook off the effects of the spell, hitting the first harpy with an earth fist that he ran into at full speed, due to his mad dash to rip me apart. It let out a wet croak as it tumbled head over heels from the force of the impact. I tried to multicast another earth first at the second one to give myself time to retrieve my weapon, but the creature sidestepped the attack, jumping at me with impressive speed. I twisted out of the way as the creature flew at me, its beak clamping down just inches from my arm with an audible snap. I turned my twist into a roll, managing to get my weapon just in time to deflect another jumping attack. This one aimed at raking me with its deadly claws. I was forced to duck under the swing from its tail as it pushed itself off my armor, flipping in the air to land back on its feet. 6 claw marks were now visible on my new armor. The fabric covering the metal plates ripped, exposing the blank sides of my rune-enchanted pieces. The armor had held though, so I could hardly complain. The harpy clicking its beak closed as it circled me, occasional chirps coming from its mouth. I really wished I could pull Bella out and use her assistance, but I wanted to keep her a secret if possible. I knew I might be in a bit of trouble when I heard an answering chirp behind me. Without turning, I dove to the side, slicing my staff through the air where I had been standing only a moment before. My intuition had been rewarded as I scored a deep slash across the harpy's neck. It looked like the one I injured with my earth fist. I rolled to my feet just in time to block yet another blow from the first harpy. Damn, these things were persistent and cunning, I thought. Honestly, it was beginning to piss me off and I could feel the rage I locked down deep start to bubble up. The injured one was slow to get back up, kicking its legs out, all the while blood pumped from its wounds. I also had to keep an eye out for the third one that was shaking off the effects of my spell. A quick glance showed that William was still locked in combat with his beast. A line of blood on his leg from a gash caused by the harpy he fought. William was too close to allow me to use my AoE spells. I could let the man fall in battle, but then I would have to fight 4-on-1. I didn't have time to debate my choice. I chose to reveal my healing ability. I had wanted to keep it secret as long as possible, but being forced into this fight I had no choice. I cast Rejuvenate on William, deciding to keep Healing Touch available for myself. William felt the refreshing healing energies flow through his body. He almost made a fatal mistake and turned his head to look at Paul in shock, but stopped himself. Taking his eyes off his opponent would be suicide. How was he just now realizing the man had healing abilities as well? It didn't take him long to realize the man had been holding out on him. Clever little bastard. He could force the man to tell him all of his skills, but that might anger his master and he didn't want to risk that. He decided to let the man keep his little secrets. Now that he knew he could heal as well, he would make sure to get more use out of the man. It was only fair since he didn't earn any experience from that particular slave. William struck out at the harpy, using his mirror ability to multiply his strikes, scoring 3 deep gashes on the beast. Good, William had been smart enough to keep his focus on the fight and not be distracted by my healing. It had been a calculated risk, but I needed him to stay in the fight. I didn't think I could fight 4 of these creatures off at once without my AoE skills. Even then it would be a close fight. All of the active effects on my staff had fizzled out when I was forced to drop it. I managed to recast, Impact, and Flurry. Imbue was down for the hour and I didn't feel the need to waste 175 mana to recast Imbue using Multicast. The harpies circled me, the injured one finally getting to its feet. I saw the third one manage to extricate itself and start running my way. I needed to end this fight. I looked away from the uninjured one to provoke a response and I wasn't disappointed. As soon as my head turned, it leaped at me. I had been prepared for this, casting Blink Step as soon as I turned. I bashed the jumping harpy out of the air with my staff, casting Earth Fist to produce a sharp spike of rock that impaled the beast as it crashed down. Next, I blurred towards the injured harpy from before, taking its head off with the bladed end in one smooth cut. With 3 seconds left, I dashed at the final harpy, lashing out with flurry as it tried to skid to a stop and bring its clawed feet to bear. It never got the opportunity as my staff cut through it 11 times, leaving a bloody hunk of meat behind. I was getting better with my accuracy but had still missed 2 of the strikes on the small creature. I turned to go finish off the impaled beast. It kicked feebly to try and extricate itself from the pillar of stone that jutted through its torso. Before I arrived, William appeared and stabbed it through the head, ending it. He flicked the blood from his spear and gave me a knowing grin. I just returned it with a blank stare. After the fight, he decided this path might be too dangerous to take a caravan through, but he would leave the decision up to the higher UPS. Chapter 40, Forest Kin. Our little scout group waited around the area until the rest of the caravan arrived, 3 hours later. I was called back to set up Charla's tent and then left to my own devices for the rest of the day. Since it was around supper time, I found where they served meals to slaves. Had a quick dinner and found a quiet place to just be alone. I had only been ordered to stay within 5 miles of the camp and return at night. It was surprisingly generous of Charla to allow me this freedom, but I didn't believe her charity for 1 minute. Instead, I took the opportunity to get as far from the camp as I could for as long as I could. I would also test this imposed range limit and see what happened. It would be important to know in the future. I knew I would likely get punished for this act, so I needed to make it worth the pain. To make my intentions less clear, I walked upstream of the camp. When I was out of sight of anyone, I ducked into the dense forest and just kept going. The forest was peaceful, if a bit unnervingly quiet. I walked until I felt a searing pain on my neck, followed by my choking. This was what it felt like to knowingly disobey orders. It was much worse than accidentally disobeying. I quickly retreated until I was well within my proscribed limit. Now I knew what would happen. Lesson learned. I found a fallen tree that I decided to use as a table. The top had been worn flat through years of rot and exposure, leaving it only slightly humped. Kneeling in the dirt, I pulled out my carving tools, setting them on the trunk. Next, I pulled out the metal scraps, setting the ones I made this morning to the side. I had a feeling rune crafting would be paramount to my survival. For this to happen, I needed to improve greatly, practicing it any time I could do it secretly. To accomplish this, I needed to test as many combinations as I could. Whether this led to more efficient runes, stronger runes, or even better combinations of runes, time would tell. For the first test, I decided to reverse what I did this morning, making a big trinity knot using fewer repeating runes, and a small knot with as many as I could feasibly fit in. I only had so many pieces of metal to test with. Plus I had to do this all the while keeping an awareness of my surroundings just in case. Nothing came to bother me as I finished, the first example being the easier of the two. I set it aside and started on the more complex one. My hands were a bit sore by the time I finished the intricate work, having to pause a few times to scan my surroundings. The lines weren't quite as clean as I would like, but considering how small I had to draw the runes, it wasn't surprising. I examined both plates with Identify to see the results. As I had expected, the larger one showed no noticeable improvement over early attempts. However, the more complex smaller design was almost as good as the larger more complex one I made in the morning. So that meant the more symbols I could fit in the design, the stronger it would become, to an extent. There seemed to be an upper limit, at least with this style of runes and design. I hadn't done much with the other styles, like the hieroglyphics. I was the most comfortable with the Celtic and Norse style or runes. I did know the hieroglyphics would work though. The iconography had been added to my runic knowledge base after I read through the book. It's just that the overall knowledge of what they did or how they could be put together was lacking. The book I had didn't cover that. I set the plates down, picking up another blank one to try adding a fourth rune to the mix. I took a while to look through my runic catalog to see what rune to add. I decided on support, hoping it would improve all the other runic properties. I carved a simple trinity knot with the added rune to match the simple large one I made earlier for a comparison. When I finished, I went to grab the other to compare it to, noticing that the plate was gone. I looked around my side of the fallen log, not seeing the piece anywhere. I knew it couldn't have fallen on the other side as the trunk sloped towards me. My first urge was to pull my staff out from my ring to defend myself. I stopped myself. If whatever creature took the plate hadn't harmed me while I was distracted, there was little need to worry. I cleared my throat, hoping the system would translate. "Excuse me, could I have my plate of metal back for a bit? I need to check something, then you can keep it if you wish." Clara knew she was being foolish by following the creatures, but since they didn't enter the forest, she had been reasonably sure of her safety. Then the one who almost spotted her earlier had simply walked alone into the woods. That had surprised her. What had astounded her though was something about this man kept the beasts of her homewood at bay. They would not come within 100 yards of the stranger. So she had risked following it, watching as it stopped at a fallen log to do something. It seemed distracted by whatever it was doing, so she had slowly approached until she could make out what it was up to. Then she spotted the precious metal plates it had lain out across the fallen tree. That would explain somewhat of the forest denizens' reluctance to come too close to this individual, but not all. She needed to find out why, so as the man started working again she stole up quietly and grabbed one of the metal pieces. She managed to get back to her hiding location and look at the strange design before the creature stopped. It didn't take it long to figure out something was missing, but it didn't seem upset by it either. It did call out and ask her to return it. This left Clara with a choice to make. She could run, but she had seen the man enter and exit the grassy wastes which no kin had crossed into and returned. Her other option was to see what the stranger would do. I watched as a 3-foot-tall bipedal creature with features reminiscent of an ant appeared from a nearby bush. It had dark brown coloring with 2 large black eyes and a small mouth with 2 short pincers. It had 4 arms, although its inner set appeared to just hang limply for the most part. While its upper arms seemed to be covered with carapace, the rest of its body was soft like flesh. One hand held a short tube about 8 inches long and the other held my plate. It wasn't wearing clothes but for an assortment of crisscrossing leather straps, held together with buckles of metal, with small bits of metal strips affixed here and there in the leather. At first, I thought the random metal was decoration, but this didn't appear to be the case as most were covered from view. Realizing this is what I must have seen earlier in the day, a glint off of one of these bits of metal. It showed the creature was intelligent as it had taken strides to cover the pieces to prevent being spotted. Another sign was the fact that it was holding out my piece of metal. I slowly reached for the piece as to not scare the creature. "Thank you," I said, quickly checking the stats to compare vs my new piece. What I found was odd, my new piece yielded no bonus at all. I handed the piece back to the creature while I mulled over the issue. I was broken from my musing by the creature. "Clara," it said, clacking the word out, making a snapping noise sounding like Klara. I realized this must be the creature's name, so I responded in kind, putting my hand to my chest. "Paul," I said, then pointed to her, Klara. It was difficult to duplicate the sound properly, but I think I did a decent job. Clara winced at the creature's butchering of her name but ignored it, instead focusing on her goal. "What, this?" Clara said, pointing to the design. He wasn't sure how much he wanted to share his ability to craft runes, so he decided to be vague. "Magic, it helps protect." Clara now knew why the beasts of the forest stayed away. This was like the totem that protected her village or the small talisman that she wore while she hunted. It was a design she had never seen before and was many times more effective at warding an area from the beasts. She wanted to keep it, but she had nothing to trade the visitor for the item. Even just the metal alone was worth all of her other talismans. She decided to see if the stranger would trade with her anyway. "I keep, you take," Klara said, pulling off the little bits of metal adorning her straps. I was about to wave her off, saying she could just have it, when my eyes fell across the items she held. On the backside were carvings. I realized they were runes, but not any earth-based rune. "Can I see?" I said, pointing to the metal pieces. Klara nodded and handed me the item to inspect. "Rune of stealth added. Rune of silence added. Rune of growth added." The first 2 I could understand, but the third I wasn't sure of until I looked at Klara. Wait, was she slightly smaller now? I thought. I wonder if this had any effect on her strength? Sure enough, she was. Her slightly looser straps are what gave it away. Not sure I would ever need to make myself larger if it didn't boost my stats, but maybe I could find a use for the rune at some point. I knew there was a Celtic rune for growth, but my tests with it never made anything bigger. She was about to pack away the piece of metal before I stopped her. "Wait," I said, grabbing the better design, "take this one instead, it is stronger." She looked at the smaller plate dubiously at first before examining the tightly packed runes. I also let her keep the items she was trying to trade me, letting her know that I got my value from the knowledge of the design. She tried a few times to get me to take them, but I refused, and eventually she gave up trying to get me to accept. Instead, she pinned them back to her straps. "Perhaps you can trade me some more knowledge instead," I said. She shrugged. At least I think it was a shrug. "You ask, I answer if can." It was good enough for me. "What do you call yourself?" "Klara," she said, looking at me dubiously. No. Like what do your people call themselves, others like you?" "We kin," she replied. "Can you tell me about your people?" "No," was all I got in response. "Okay. What about the forest, the creatures? The strange grass area?" "Forest large, many creatures, many dangerous creatures, all fear your metal, your magic, stay well clear. Grass river not part of forest, come with new world. Creatures there not fear talisman, or magic but do not leave river of grass. Well, that explained the lack of creature sightings in the forest and also why the grass area felt so out of place. I decided to ask even though I wouldn't mention it to anyone. Is it safe to travel through your forest? You, yes. Those with you, no. I would keep that in mind for later. We talked for a bit longer. I asked her about the oily trees and found out they coated their darts in the substance to take down prey. I was glad I hadn't stuck my hand in a potentially lethal substance. After a while, she began to grow agitated and I told her she could leave if she wished. She did just that, seeming to blend into the forest. Her runes of stealth and silence working wonders. Shit, I forgot to scan the creature, I thought. I was so caught up in the conversation it completely slipped my mind. I kicked myself mentally for missing out on the chance to see what level and class Klara was. Perhaps we would meet again. A minute or so later I heard the unmistakable sounds of someone walking towards me. I quickly packed up all my gear before Charla came into view. She looked pissed. When nobody in camp could point out where I had gone. It caused her to come to get me herself, by activating the tracking magic within my collar. I knew I was going to pay for my transgression. I suffered for my hubris that night. After the beating, she told me to walk in a circle around the camp until morning. By the time the sun rose above the horizon I was dead on my feet. Luckily it wasn't our team's turn to scout. I got to rest a few hours after Charla decided to release me from her previous orders. The only person to blame was me. I knew taking creative license with her orders could come back to bite me. I wasn't sure what I learned offset the pain I endured. I needed to try and stay on the woman's good side or at least not stir her ire. I was getting the distinct impression that she had very little control over her emotional state.